Welcome everybody. It's great to have you all here today for the iCARE webinar. My name is Rebecca and I am the Provincial Integration Program Coordinator with AMSSA. I'm going to start today by providing a little bit of introductory information before handing things off to the IRCC iCARE team. I would like to acknowledge that the AMSSA office is on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. We would like to thank Immigration, Refugee, and Citizenship Canada for funding this event today. And I am now pleased to introduce our IRCC panelists for today, Jeslyn and Justin. They will also be joined by their colleague, Jared. And I will now pass things over to them.
Hello, everybody. I hope everybody is doing well today and can see my screen. So my name is Jeslyn, or Jess, and I work at Settlement and Integration Policy at IRCC. And Justin and I both work on the team that is responsible for iCARE from kind of a policy point of view. And today we're hoping to give a little bit of an overview of how iCARE fits into our work so that you can understand kind of why we ask the questions we ask and why some of the reporting looks the way it looks. As we go through today, we have quite a few question breaks in there. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to please, if you have a question about something that myself or Justin is saying, to put it in the Q&A function. And then when it comes to the breaks, Justin and I will take a look in the Q&A section and answer as we go. So I think there's probably 4 or 5 of those breaks throughout this first presentation. In the second part, Justin will be going over the questions that were asked during the iCARE focus groups. So that's really in-depth kind of functional questions about iCARE. So there's lots of other information coming outside of the deck. So with that, I will start. So today what we're going to look at is overall the Immigration and Settlement Program. So a bit of background around why we have it, measuring and reporting on the program, get into iCARE data collection, get into a little bit of the other data that IRCC has at its disposal to conduct analysis. And then we're going to try to give a really specific example of a settlement journey of a newcomer and take a look at like how it looks from their point of view, from an iCARE point of view, and then how it might look from the team that Justin and I work on looking at the outcomes point of view. Get a sense of the larger outcomes landscape, and then a little bit about the team that Justin and I work on. It's kind of a newer team, so we'll talk a little bit about the work that we anticipate doing. So first, I have a question kind of for everybody. You don't actually have to answer in the chat, but just think about the answer here is it clear what IRCC does with all of the data that you guys spend so much time giving us? So just thinking about that, I'm kind of going to assume here that the answer is no, and that's why we're here today, and that's great. So to start things off here, in fall 2020, so kind of in the middle of coronavirus pandemic, maybe the middle, 84% of Canadians agreed that immigration has a positive impact on the economy of Canada. We all know immigrants fill jobs where there are gaps in labors. They help to decrease unemployment rates in key sectors to our economy. They create jobs by starting businesses. And then besides kind of the pure economic, they contribute to the cultural richness of Canada as artists and musicians and authors and chefs. The government of Canada is also committed to sustaining and enhancing the viability of FMCs, Francophone minority communities, and achieving a 4.4% share of French-speaking immigrants outside of Quebec by 2023. And in terms of immigration going forward, it is going to be essential to the working age population growth. Without immigration, it's estimated that the core working age population is projected to decrease in the next 20 years. And when it comes to COVID, obviously rebuilding after COVID-19, immigration will play a vital role in both the economic and the societal recovery of the country in each of its provinces. So thinking about, that's kind of immigration, that's why IRCC exists. Why is there a settlement program? So the settlement and integration of newcomers is really, really important for us to understand. It's important to our future as a diverse, inclusive, and prosperous nation. It is a whole of society endeavor. That's kind of the terminology that we use. And while the federal government, including IRCC, is kind of a key player it is a shared responsibility across all levels of government, civil society, and all sorts of people in between. So by investing and in facilitating the settlement and integration of newcomers, what we're hoping the Government of Canada's objective, for example, is to maximize the social and economic contribution to Canada. So the settlement program, I'm sure you're familiar with this, but I will still go over it just in case. The program aims to assist newcomers to overcome any barriers they may face while trying to participate in social, cultural, civic, and economic life in Canada. The funding is allocated by province and territory. There's also kind of a national fund that's managed at the national level, as well as the pre-arrival funds. We also have a transfer to Quebec because Quebec kind of manages its own settlement programming. And I should be clear here, the funding is allocated to the IRCC regions, province and territory, not the provincial and territorial governments. So here's just a quick example. Prior to COVID-19, the settlement program was seeing increased client volumes year over year. This is funding versus client volumes. So there's the PR landings versus how many clients we're having. So as you can see here, it's not just people who are arriving in the same year accessing services. There's people who arrive 2, 3, 4, 5, sometimes longer years continuing to access services. So that just gives you a sense of the volume of our settlement program and the volume of the money associated with it. So as I'm sure you know, services are funded through contribution agreements and sometimes through grants as well. And they're delivered by third party, which is you lovely folks, the organizations. And the services, the purpose of the funding is to allow for access to services, knowledge of life in Canada, increasing language skills if needed, connection to the community, and to try to enable labor market participation. And that's kind of, there's a lot of different variations of all of these pieces. So in order to reach these key objectives here, we also try to ensure sector capacity and professional development, standardization of best practices, and building knowledge of the program's clients through work like research work, academics, third-party research, as well as our own internal research. So that's kind of the other piece besides the direct services that go to clients. So why we need to measure and report. I think that, like I said here, on the face of it, the answer to this is obvious. We all want the program to be the best it can be. We want to make sure, to the extent possible, it's meeting the needs of clients. We want to deliver services in the best way possible to those clients. And we want to make sure that we're expanding and learning from our best practices, as well as learning from our challenges, what didn't work, and kind of be able to adapt and be flexible, all in the best interest of the client and the settlement program. So like I said, we do a lot of work, both IRCC and organizations do a lot of work to this end. So research produced by IRCC SPOs and academics help inform the direction of the program, including policy changes. And there's also some key functions on like the evaluations, evaluation of the settlement program that was completed in 2018. There's a couple other evaluations underway right now, for example, Swiss. So they play a really key role in providing periodic and in-depth insights into the program as well. So kind of taking all of the work that is done on the ground and understanding how it works, what we can measure, and how we can report on it. So there's a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes that I think you may or may not know, and I definitely wouldn't know except for the fact I work for the government. So here's an example. It's a CBC article from 2 years ago. Ottawa to spend $113 million on pre-arrival services for new immigrants. So great, that's great. In order to actually get the money that is written about in this article or maybe announced by a politician, we need to first write a Treasury Board submission to access the funding. And what this requires to do is to describe the intended outcomes of the program and how we will report on the use of this money. So this exact $113 million, how will we report and what are the outcomes we're expected to see? Furthermore, we have to report on this yearly. So Treasury Board does come back to us yearly, and they will also come back to us to say these outcomes, aren't good enough or aren't in depth enough, or lots of other things. There's lots of back and forth in order to get access to this money, and then we do have to report on this yearly. Furthermore, the settlement program as a whole has to report to Parliament and to the public through the departmental results reports. And this is this is accessible online if you search for it. It includes things like number of clients per component and clients who increase their language skills, all of the kind of key indicators for the settlement program, and all the rest of IRCC's programming as well, all reports under the departmental results report. So I think hopefully you're getting a sense of, like, yearly you kind of start dreading the time when you're getting the emails from Treasury Board and asking for various pockets of money. Another thing to keep in mind is that almost all money for the settlement program is accessed by either an MC, which is similar to a Treasury Board, or a Treasury Board submission. So any of the programs that people might be familiar with, for example, the Visible Minority Women's Pilot, all of those things are accessed separately, and they all have their own intended outcomes, and we need to report on those intended outcomes every year. So this is kind of the government bureaucracy piece that people might not understand or might not see that we have to do and continue to have to do for as long as we receive the money. So every year we have to fill out lots of different templates and pull lots of different data and lots of different indicators to account for the money that the settlement program gets kind of as a whole. So let's pause and take questions. I'm going to pause my screen, I think, so that I can see the Q&A section. So where can we find the outcomes and the reports? So I can provide a link to AMSSA after this. It is typically called InfoBase, and I can provide really specific links to the IRCC reporting, but it's actually a really, really interesting website. In my opinion, you can see all of the departmental reports for any government department that you would like. And even within IRCC, you can look at just the settlement pieces, but you can also look at all of the other indicators as well. So I can definitely pass that along. The evaluation for Swiss is underway. So there's nothing, I can't share it yet. It isn't completed, it's just underway. And in the example of the 113 million, what percentage filters down to the SPOs? So that's a good question. The first thing to always keep in mind that when the government, for example, in that CBC article, the 113 million was probably, that was a very old article. It's probably over 3 years or over 5 years or something like that. So that's always a really key piece of information to pay attention to. And then depending on, I think most of it does filter down to organizations in terms of direct funding to organizations, but out of that money as well is the only way that we get funding for example, our jobs. So if we need somebody to administer the program, or we need officers or something like that to administer the program, there is a certain portion that would go to fund the IRCC side of things. But I'm not sure what the exact percentage would be that kind of filters down to vote 10, but in my experience, it is the vast majority of it. But the key there is to always look at any time they announce any sort of budget, it is always over 10 years, over 3 years, over 5 years. So that's really important to keep in mind from what does that mean on a yearly basis. So that I think is good. So the evaluation for Swiss is underway. I'm not sure what the timing is for their reporting. Okay, I'll go over to you, Justin.
Thank you. So one of the main questions we have is when we're talking about all this money is where do we begin? When we have a program that's worth almost $800 million, the daunting task of where to start is kind of the first question asked. So you may ask, where do we start? And we start with outcomes. So the main answer to that is where we begin is outputs. Outputs are forming the bedrock of our outcome measurement process. And you may be asking what the outputs are. The outputs are things such as the number of clients we serve, the number of services that are delivered to those clients, the duration of the service, the dates, so basically do they span over a day, do they span over a month's time, location of these services, and how we deliver these services, such as whether they're online, if they're in person. These are all topics that you might recognize that you are actually reporting in the iCARE system. Additional things such as topics, the organization, And we also know you guys have targets posted in your contribution agreements. So those are all the outputs that we are reporting on. As I mentioned, this is all items that we are capturing in the iCARE system and related to the clients and services they are receiving. So as you know, iCARE is used by SPOs such as yourselves that are funded by IRCC to deliver settlement and resettlement services. You'll also know, if you use the iCARE system on a regular basis, that this information is captured at the client level through a client's UCI number, or what we call their PR number. By capturing this information at the client level, we're also able to track the services that they receive. And these services that are delivered are, again, as they are in your contribution agreement. The iCARE system is broken down into these components. We have the needs and asset assessment and referral module. We have the employment related service module. We have the information orientation module, the community connection, language assessment and training, as well as the resettlement assistance program. All of these modules are based, again, on what has been captured in your contribution agreement. So if you're only limited to delivering one of these services, you'll notice that you only have one of these services in the iCARE system. So the next slide is just to kind of give you some key settlement information, some information that we actually derived from the iCARE system. We have a quick graph here that just shows you a breakdown of how many clients we serve by component, along with how many services are delivered. And a lot of this information, even though as simple as it may be, is very telling. As soon as I pulled this information and I looked at the language assessment results, to me, that is very clear as to why the number of clients and the number of services are so aligned. Because in many scenarios, we know that a client receives only one language assessment until they are put into a language training course. So again, this information, although fairly simple at first glance, is very telling on what is happening on the ground. So we know from the client perspective who these clients are, and then we're able to link it to the service information according to what's been entered in iCARE. So again, these are kind of the data collection points that I kind of mentioned in the previous slide, but we're able to break down all the information by each and individual kind of data points. So again, I've been talking about the duration, the dates of the service basically identifies what fiscal year the data pertains to. We're able to track location. We know where clients are immigrating to, and then we know where they are receiving services, because we're capturing a service location at the service level as well as at the client level. Again, the delivery methods, this is actually a newer data point that we've started collected as a result of COVID, and you'll notice we have some new questions pertaining to whether it was online, if it was in person, or over the phone. We also, in many of the modules, we capture the topics that were covered, and this allows us to get to some of the questions that we need to answer when we're reporting back to Parliament. We also have a lot of information pertaining to the organization in terms of funding targets and, again, location of these services. So we're just, I guess we'll just open up if we have additional questions as to what we've covered. So one of the questions we have is, how do you measure target UCI by a client or service? When I was talking about the targets, it's pertaining to the targets that have been put into your contribution agreement. In many of these scenarios, it's my understanding, and Jared, please correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm kind of going outside of my scope, but the target is pertaining to clients served. So at the client level and not necessarily the service. So you guys might have a target by activity to deliver a service to an I-know service to 100 clients. Because we're capturing the information at the client level, we're able to determine whether you've met that 100 target at the end of the fiscal year pertaining to that activity. So what does success look like to us? So the goal of here is to kind of give you guys a perspective of what we are measuring. And again, this is all pertaining to direct services. So for those of you that are delivering services directly to the clients. The settlement program has immediate outcomes. These should not be new because these are actually the outcomes that are actually been identified in your contribution agreement. When you guys are describing the activities and the activities that you will be delivering to your clients, you guys would have to identify at least one of these immediate outcomes as to the goal of delivering those services to clients. So there's 2, 4, 6 outcomes, immediate outcomes, and you would have at least one of these in your contribution agreement. So whether it is clients increasing knowledge of life in Canada, clients improving their official language, these are kind of the immediate outcomes that we want as part of the program when a client receives a service. Next, after the immediate outcomes, we have the intermediate outcomes. And this deals more with the way we kind of group these together is the immediate outcome is more the knowledge, and the intermediate outcome is more the behavior of the client. So is the client accessing services that meet their needs? Are they making informed decisions about life in Canada? And so on, and potentially are they making connections in the community as well as with institutions? This is all of these outcomes are based on benefiting Canada from the settlement and integration of clients. So if we're achieving those outcomes, that is a great start. But when we're measuring these outcomes, context is actually very important to us. We note by looking at all the different types of clients we have that each and every client has a different starting line and a different finishing line, because every newcomer that comes has different needs or abilities as they integrate into Canada. So we know that the newcomer knowledge, such as their skills and abilities, differ upon arrival. This could be based on their immigration category. And even within an immigration category, we know that the starting line and finish line can differ significantly, and that could pertain to potentially the economic PA versus the economic SD, which is their spouse or dependent of the main applicant. So our expectation of service of a newcomer should receive and the outcomes they should reach are different. The key to understanding the outcomes is leverage data from a variety of different places. So iCARE is not the sole place that we're able to get all the information we need. So it's really important to know that we're making informed decision on a base on a large quantity of data and not just iCARE. So the next slide is going to just show you what all those different data points and systems are. You guys are most familiar with the iCARE system, but in the back end, we have a variety of different databases that we're actually able to connect to. So the first bucket that I guess we're going to talk about from the data ecosystem is data about the newcomers themselves. As you guys know, you're very familiar with the iCARE. Again, that is telling us which clients are receiving the services and what those services are. We're able to link that information with our GCMS database. That is the Global Case Management System. And this provides all the demographic information that we have on each client. As you guys get your iCARE reports, you'll notice that you don't actually enter in demographic information, but we're able to give you information about the client's demographics. And that information is actually coming from our GCMS database. So what we're able to do is link these two systems to give us that combined information. We also have the newcomer survey, which was first launched in 2018. And this newcomer survey allows us to reach newcomers, whether they were a client or not, and see how they progressed according to whether they received a service or not. And we also have the IMDb. And the IMDb basically gives us a tax information for newcomers. It allows us to link their tax information to the service they received to determine all the different outcomes that we're interested in determining. The next bucket of information we have is pertaining to your information from the SPO's perspective. We have the GCMS system, which is where you guys have your contribution agreement. It gives us indicators on your CA, as well as information on your SPO. So whether the CA funding amount, the location, your different branches, and so on. You'll also know we collect information in the APPR. This is the annual project performance report. Even though it is collected in iCARE, most of it is pertaining to information, qualitative information that you've entered at year end. When we link these systems, it is able to give us that larger view, basically from like 10,000 feet. This is that at the beginning, Jeslyn talked about, we were going to talk about the settlement journey of an individual. So this is our attempt to show you how it works for an individual. So we've taken an individual, Rashad Khalid, and we've basically mapped out his journey into the settlement world. So at the beginning, we know the Khalid is, just a little delay on my end. So the Khalid family, who are GARs, and they've completed a pre-arrival settlement service, and that would basically be their first introduction into the settlement realm. Next, they would take a flight and land in Toronto. That would be their intended destination. And next, they would get connected with a RAP provider. This is where the Khalid family will navigate the federal and provincial system to obtain necessary documents and service pertaining to their situation. Next, we have Khalid, as I mentioned, he's kind of completed the RAP service, which is up to a 6-week program where they're receiving service pertaining to their scenario. And then they might be referred on to the settlement portion of our service providers. So the Khalid, most scenarios, they will receive a needs assessment, needs and asset assessment, and this actually gives them a settlement plan in which to follow throughout their journey. So after the needs assessment, we might move on to an employment workshop. So this is where they might talk about their certification that they've had from their home country, and then how they can move through the system to obtain citizenship certification in Canada. So this would help them meet their goals toward licensing requirements. After they've received that employment, they might move on to an information session on pertaining to employment topics and income, on how to manage the employment world and understand the Canadian job market. They might want to learn information about resume screening, creating resumes and so on. Next, we might have them move into the language realm. So receiving that language assessment, which then identifies their needs so that they can be placed into a language training program that pertains to their requirements. So what we're going to do is kind of transition, and we've kind of laid out the journey that they've taken. We want to put in the data kind of entry perspective in how it works. So we've changed from the journey, and now we're going to look at the data perspective. So you'll notice there's a little bit of transition. So as we know, from the pre-arrival perspective, we're going to collect information. So as they're receiving the pre-arrival service, our pre-arrival SPOs will be entering that information as an INO record, and then the topics that were captured. So from an iCARE perspective, we know it was a pre-arrival service and the topics pertaining to that service. Next, we're going to move through the RAP. So again, we'll be entering a RAP. Our RAP providers will be entering a record. They'll be identifying whether there's translation and interpretation provided. They'll talk about the accommodations received and the type of orientation provided. Next, we kind of have that referral from the RAP provider into the settlement providers, where next we talked about the needs assessment. So again, in the needs assessment records, we're identifying all the needs that were identified. We'll be able to track whether those needs were, whether a referral was provided. We learn about whether support services will be needed for this individual to participate moving forward. And really importantly, that the client is given a settlement plan to kind of lay out that proportion. So we collect that as well, whether that plan was provided. Next, we have the employment portion. We'll learn about the client's current employment status, and we'll learn about the occupation of which preparations for licensure was received. So we learn about their current occupation, but we also learn what occupation they want to get into if it's different than their current occupation. Next, we move on to the I&O. This is where you record whether the session was one-on-one or group, and again, the topics that were covered during that session. Last but not least, we're going to learn about the language assessment, the tools that were used to assess his assessment. We'll learn about his language training requirements, whether there's special needs, whether he has literacy requirements. And then next, by the training, we'll know what courses he's been enrolled in. From the course perspective, we know the schedule, we know the format, and the location of these services. So again, it gives us that full gamut when we look into the iCARE system. Next, Jess is going to talk about, so we've talked about the data perspective, and then the next question would be from an outcomes perspective, how this is all linked. So I'm just going to let Justin talk about the outcome perspective.
So like Justin said, we can kind of see how the journey has gone for kind of Rashad on the ground, and then from your perspective, putting the data into iCARE. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the types of ways that IRCC can use this data to analyze outcomes. And so I do want to say that everything that I'm going to talk about right now are just examples. None of this is necessarily kind of on the go, so just keep that in mind. There's no results from any of these. It's just trying to give some examples of how we end up using the data that you give us. So taking a look from the outcomes perspective. So let's kind of focus in the middle there. Let's say Rashad has been in Canada for a few years. He has filed taxes, he's filled out the census, and he's responded to the newcomer outcome survey. So what that does is give us kind of the longer term information about Rashad. And then what we can do is use that combined with iCARE information to really take a look at how the settlement program and its certain specific services lead to outcomes, how they impact the outcomes of clients. So for example, starting way up at the top again, pre-arrival record from the RAP services he received pre-arrival. A good example here is his information might be part of a study that compares the outcomes of newcomers who did and did not receive pre-arrival services. So we know from iCARE that he did receive them, and then we know through that data ecosystem all of Rashad's characteristics. We know when he landed, all of those other things. So that might be one of the ways in which we use that information to take a look at the impact of pre-arrival services. Does it work better for certain populations, et cetera, et cetera. So moving right along, they arrive in Toronto, then they're accessing RAP. So what can we do with the RAP information? So combined with the responses to the newcomer outcome survey, his responses to the newcomer outcome survey combined with iCARE responses can help us understand the extent to which GARs are achieving the outcomes that are set out for the RAP program. So that's really important as well. The RAP program has its own funding, very similar to the settlement program, that needs to be accounted for every year. There are outcomes set out for the program. So it's really important for us to be able to measure those outcomes. Even if it is the 4 to 6 weeks, the outcomes are adjusted appropriately for that shorter time frame. And all of this information can be used together. I should also say that I am saying Rashad a lot, but we'd never be looking at actually just Rashad by himself. It's always, you know, him in this RAP situation. It would be all of the recipients of RAP in a certain year or a certain group of years, grouped with all of the newcomer outcome survey responses in a certain year. So we never really looked at, you know, one individual. He would just be part of the sample for the research that we could conduct. And then again, he goes from RAP to settlement, and then we're into the NARS world. So his Rashad's iCARE service data might be part of an outcomes comparison study between newcomers who, for example, did and did not receive centralized NARS services. So certain communities, certain provinces, depending on what's, you know, where you are, have a centralized NARS, a centralized approach to needs assessments, and some don't. So what that does for us, it allows us to compare, are the outcomes of newcomers in those communities versus newcomers not in those communities, how do they differ? So where are the best, you know, what can we get, what are the best parts of the centralized NARS approach, and where can we learn from other NARS approaches? Here I've highlighted as well qualitative research. So qualitative research is a big part of our work moving forward, similar to an evaluation. We have, case studies that will be occurring, interviews and focus groups. So the data, what it does is it really just kind of narrows the light, it narrows the spotlight onto something, and it allows us to dive deep and understand how many clients receive a NARS in each of these communities, and what their needs were according to iCARE in those communities. And then we do a further deep dive before we kind of draw any conclusions about what is and what isn't working by talking to lots of different stakeholders that are involved. So qualitative research is really important here, and this is a good example of how the needs assessment data could be used. Next, moving along to the employment record in iCARE. What this could help us do, for example, is using iCARE and IMDb information. So if you remember, that's the tax information. And again, that's all anonymous. So the tax information linked to iCARE service records, it might help us conduct an analysis of the economic outcomes of newcomers who received employment services versus those who didn't. So really taking a look at the economic outcomes. Is there an economic benefit for certain populations with certain characteristics? Whether it be immigration category, whether it be people within a certain age group, gender, all sorts of different breakdowns that could be done depending on kind of what we're looking at, and to understand the impact or the potential impact of our services on economic outcomes. So moving along to the information and orientation record. What we could use this information for is understand at a really low level, an intervention level analysis, to understand which information is maybe most needed for GARs in particular, and at what point in their journey. So this is a big question, the RAP merging into the settlement system, what information makes sense at what time for which people. So again, not saying all GARs are the same, but understanding which characteristics, whether they're intending to work or they're getting their kids enrolled in school or they need language training. So understanding what seems to be working best. Lots of organizations do this in lots of different ways. So let's kind of dive into those and see what might come out of it. So see what kind of information we could have out of it. Again, here I've highlighted qualitative research as something that would be very important in this particular case, to understand the context, the different delivery systems, and to talk to, potentially talk to GARs as well, who have been here for longer or shorter, to figure out what information would have been best at certain points in time. And for the last one, I'll just go over to language assessment and language training. So he received a language assessment and enrolled in a course. From an iCARE perspective, the assessment results get put into iCARE, and the training, he gets enrolled into a course, which tells us a lot of information about the type of training he's receiving. And what we could use this for example, the language assessment. It will help us understand, like Justin was talking about, the starting line of GARs. So it would help us understand when GARs are coming into the country, what does their starting line look like? What does their language ability look like? Does it differ by country? Does it differ by mother tongue? Does it differ by education? All of these pieces of information, so that if we are better able to plan for when we get a certain, GARs from a certain country, we're better able to plan. So we saw this quite a bit in the Syria, Operation Syria. So it was really understanding and trying to get a quick understanding of what their needs are going to be, and then trying to plan quickly to accommodate those things. From a language training point of view, we might use the language training course information combined with Rashad's progress that you kind of document on a regular basis, to understand the effectiveness of various training formats on literacy learners. And again, this is would rely as well on qualitative research to kind of narrow that spotlight a little bit more. But what this allows us to do is to understand, Rashad might be getting full-time training. What about those who are receiving part-time training? In our new world, what about those who are receiving virtual training? Does class size make a difference? All of these pieces of information could be used to understand what types of characteristics work for different populations. So we're going to pause again for questions, and I will just take a look here. So somebody asked, is the information public, and how can we access the information in the ecosystem? So that's going back to the slide that we talked about, all of those pieces of information. So that's the information that iCARE has, that IRCC has access to. Because it's information about like individual newcomers, that is not public. However, there are resources like open data, where IRCC posts many tables every month that tell you how many people are arriving in Canada as permanent residents from certain immigration categories to certain communities or CMAs. So you can see some of that information there as well. The IMDb, the Statistics Canada website does publish a lot of papers using the IMDb as a data source as well. How can a newcomer get RAP services is one of the next questions. So in order to get RAP services, you need to be a government assisted refugee. And there are 32 RAP organizations across Canada in 34 communities. And the government assisted refugees only get sent to those communities. And they kind of, the RAP organizations are aware that those newcomers are arriving, and we kind of link them up right from the get-go. So RAP services, it's Resettlement Assistance Program. That's what RAP stands for. So not all newcomers are eligible for RAP services in particular, but any newcomer, as long as they're not a citizen, would be eligible for regular settlement services. So for example, if they're a privately sponsored refugee or a protected person who has just gained protected person status, they are eligible for settlement services. So the next one I think was a follow-up to the specifically here in BC. I'm not sure of the RAP SPOs off the top of my head. I don't know if Jared, you are off the top of your head as well, but maybe we can figure that out. Is RAP only for PRs? Yes. It is only for the government assisted refugees. So the next question is newcomer outcome surveys for any PRs or those within 5 years. So the way that we do the newcomer outcome survey is we send it going back, I'm just going to do some quick math, 7 years. So we go back as far as 7 years, and we send it to all newcomers. The difference is that because just of the vast amount of kind of emails that would entail, we do odd years in 1 year and then even years in the next year. So in 2020, who we sent out the survey to was any newcomer who landed as a permanent resident in 2019, 2017, 2015, and 2013. So going back, and then this year when we run the exact same survey, we will get those who landed in 2020, 2018, 2016, and 2014. So that's how we'll do those ones. So it actually goes back 7 years in terms of any newcomer, because they could be clients or non-clients as well. So the next question is, do you collect information about newcomers referred to programs that are not funded by IRCC? So they complement those provided by the settlement program. So in the needs assessment module, there is a section to tell us whether or not there's a need identified for some kind of mainstream services that are maybe provided by the province, for example, or other federal agencies, and whether or not a referral was provided. So that's the extent to which we do that. And that is a really good example of something that we would dive into a little bit deeper if we're doing a really deep dive into something in particular, for example, employment. You know, I know that we're not the main employment player in terms of employment services. We might be for newcomers, but there are a lot of provincial services or other federal departments that provide employment services. So really getting an understanding of how all of those services may interact, where IRCC is doing a good job, where there might be overlaps, all of those pieces of information. But the individual information is in the needs assessment and assets referrals record for that one. So how do you track whether a referral was made for an identified need? Again, that's in the needs assessment module. where it is whether or not something was identified as a need and whether or not a referral was made. And we do not track where that referral was made in terms of like a specific organization or whether it was internal. What we're just trying to understand is whether or not referrals are being made to clients to continue on trying to get that need addressed. So the next question is the survey for GARs only? No, the survey is sent to all newcomers, every single person who became a permanent resident in those years that I listed. So last year, this year, it was sent to, I think we sent it to about 870,000 people. And in this year's survey, we got 80,000 responses. So the next question is it possible to know what the questions we ask in NOS? Yep, we often share the instrument, if you will, like the Word version of the survey. So I can definitely send that along after the fact as well, so you can see the questions that we ask. It hopefully won't be of any surprise that on that slide that Justin went through with our outcomes, it's directly tied to that. We don't ask any information outside of trying to get answers to the outcomes of the program, if that makes sense. So I can definitely send that along as well after this presentation. So the next question is, if you see some service gaps in NOS Newcomer Outcome Survey, how do you address that? So this is a really great question, and I think we will talk a little bit about this in terms of the group that Justin and I work with and how this works. But basically, I think loosely what would happen is, like I said, so the quantitative data, we need, you need to be careful about making large scale changes based on quantitative data, right? So it really helps us get an understanding of what is going on and what the data is telling us. But we always need to make sure we're diving in a little bit deeper, conducting some qualitative research or even more specific quantitative research to really understand what those gaps might be. So if certain newcomers, maybe a certain population of newcomers aren't achieving an outcome kind of like we would expect, and it's a little bit surprising, not saying it's good or bad, but it's surprising. What we would do is kind of dive into their iCARE data, try to figure out what kind of services they're receiving. Are they receiving more or less or a different type, and then keep going from there. So it's kind of like a chain of investigation, if you will, to figure out what is going on, to figure out if it's a good thing, what are the best practices that are happening? Why are these people doing better than you would expect to see? And if it's kind of not what you would expect to see, to try to figure out where we could find some best practices that we can apply to different populations and see how that works as well. So that's those two. And then the next question is, how is the response rate to the newcomer outcome survey? We typically get, so number one, it's an online survey, which always presents some issues because, especially for those who arrived in Canada a little bit longer ago, like even in 2013, our email address information isn't great. So it's getting better and better, obviously, as time goes on. And a lot of times there's also issues with people some people put their like immigration consultant email into the email in GCMS, and so we can't contact them. So some people are just not contactable, but typically what we get is about 10% of the population. And we conduct some pretty rigorous representativeness analysis, and we're able to provide a sense of, if we're looking at refugees, for example, we're able to provide our policy folks with a sense of who responded to the survey, where certain things might be overrepresented and where certain things might be underrepresented based on the responses to the survey. So the next question is, in general, how can the outcome data impact direct services? Does it have an impact at a regional or national level, and generally over what timeline? So I think there's lots of different ways that outcome data can impact direct services, and it really depends on what type of information we're looking at. So a lot of times we aim for a national impact, if that makes sense, but that doesn't mean that our investigation isn't at the regional level. So what we might do is take a look at what Ontario is doing, seeing how it works, seeing where they're contributing to positive outcomes, and then providing the findings wider than that so that it can be applied in a more consistent way. And I mean, if we're figuring out what works, I don't know, to teach certain people English, then let's kind of share those best practices across IRCC and allow that information to have an impact at the service level. I think individual SPOs provincially or collectively across the country. So I think kind of how it generally works is we learn lessons from individual SPOs and maybe in groups of SPOs as well, right? So let's go back to the needs assessment example. Those providing a centralized NARS, that's kind of a group of individual SPOs. We might compare them to people who have the same types of clients, but do not do a centralized NARS. So we have a bit of kind of a natural comparison group here. So we're learning from the individual SPOs. We're trying to look at the outcomes of clients and then having that information inform whether it be kind of an SDI project, maybe like the Service Delivery Innovation Project, to test certain things. How can we test our findings to make sure it works? And then eventually kind of showing those findings at a larger scale and have them actually impact how services are directed. The question is, are the surveys in English only, or are they translated into different languages? They are translated into 9 languages, English and French. And then we can see if I can remember off the top of my head what the other languages are. They are Arabic, Farsi, Chinese, Somali, Armenian, and 2 more, Spanish, and there's one more. I should know this, but I can't remember the last one. Basically what we did is we look at the mother tongue of like the top mother tongues of all of the arrivals within the years that we're accessing, and we look at that, and then we get it translated into those languages. It doesn't usually shift very much from year to year. We also kind of do a special focus on the languages of refugees. So that's where you see Armenian coming out in the Syrian kind of context. So that's where you see it. It's Amharic is the last one I remembered. So that's how we do that one. And so we kind of check that when we're ramping up for the survey every year. We take a look at, if there's kind of a mass change in where newcomers are coming from or what their mother tongue is. We may be continuing to add languages. Sometimes we do take away languages. So for example, we know Tagalog is a really common language, but in the past, when we run surveys in Tagalog, nobody answers them, and like 2 people answer them in Tagalog. So there might be some higher languages that you're thinking about that we don't run the survey in, and that would be wise, because in our experience, nobody actually answers the survey in those languages. They tend to answer in English or French. So that's the survey question. And are you going to share NOS results with SPOs in the future? So that's a really good question. We have a report that should be publicly released in the spring. I would say we're aiming for the end of April. It's undergoing some professional editing right now. So end of April, there'll be a report that's publicly released that talks about all of the information we know about newcomer settlement outcomes. So NOS is kind of the star of the show, as well as iCARE. So understanding iCARE uses, but it also pulls in, third-party research, academic research, information that we garner from kind of other sources to triangulate findings and to really identify areas of further investigation, if you will, or further research. So you can look forward to that. That'll, I'm sure, there'll be probably a lot of communications about that once that does come out. I think there's one more question slide at the end here, so we can take questions then as well. So I'm just going to keep going and talk a little bit about the larger outcomes landscape. So I think I've already touched on this a little bit, but we understand that the outcomes that you contribute to are much larger than what we've discussed today. And that is why, hopefully what you have a good understanding of now is why iCARE asks the questions it asks about how IRCC needs to report to Parliament and to Treasury Board, who kind of controls all the money, why we ask the questions we ask in order to be able to report on what we need to report on, in addition to doing all of this outcomes kind of analysis and understanding how we can make the program better to make sure it's serving all of the different types of populations that we're serving. We understand that your work has huge benefits, not only to clients, but the community to which you work. You guys prepare, prepare people to access provincial services. You prepare people so that when they walk into, say, a Service Canada, they know what they're asking for. Or so there's lots of benefit to the work that you do outside of what we've talked about today, and outside of what can be captured in kind of the departmental outcomes piece. On a national scale, so I think I've kind of mentioned this, it just isn't possible to capture all of the individual nuances present either within your organizations, but also present within your communities, present within even your provinces and territories. They all interact differently. All the provinces have different services that complement the federal settlement services. So in terms of reporting it at a higher level, it is really difficult to capture all the individual nuances, but that doesn't mean that they don't matter and that we don't know about them. And that's why we keep talking about things like case studies and really narrowing that scope and that spotlight to understand how things work. So work like evaluations, research, and intervention level analysis are better able to capture those important results. So I think I've tried to mention it kind of throughout the presentation about the additional work that uses iCARE data as a very, very important base for us to understand who our clients are, what services they're receiving, and then moving forward from that to be able to chunk those people out into groups of interest, populations of interest, or services of interest, and then move forward with things like evaluations and research. So a little bit about the group that Justin and I work with. So it's called the Outcomes Analysis Unit. It lives within the Settlement and Integration Policy world in NHQ in Ottawa, although right now we don't all have to be here, but at NHQ, at National Headquarters. It was established in late 2018. And the purpose of it is to tell the story of the impacts of the settlement program. So our mandate is to use existing data. So we talked a lot about our existing data, and develop new methodologies to report on client outcomes in an accurate and coherent way. So I've mentioned some of these new methodologies like case studies, like comparison studies, all of those other pieces of information. So we're developing those and we'll be implementing those. Obviously, I'm sure you can all understand that COVID really threw a wrench into this, because it's difficult to do case studies and like really implant yourself in a community, for a few weeks and get a sense of what's going on in a virtual environment. So we're kind of doing what we can with what we can do, but our general plans were definitely derailed quite a bit from COVID. The other piece we're looking to do is just improve the evidence base available. So learn where we can about what questions, maybe what additional questions we should be asking on the newcomer outcome survey. What additional qualities of a service do we need to ask about in iCARE? So to improve those, so to learn from what we're finding, what our research is finding, and then to make recommendations back to improve the kind of quantitative evidence base available, and to really understand how settlement program services can be attributed to the client outcomes. So really kind of trying to tease out the impact of our specific services and our specific money on the outcomes of clients. We also want to report on value for money. So in kind of the evaluation and research world, we talk a lot about effectiveness and efficiency, and kind of what our view is, and what we're trying to figure out is if something is or isn't efficient, that is one thing. But once you add in whether or not it's effective, that efficiency looks different, right? So something might cost more, but is achieving more or better or faster outcomes. So just weighing those two pieces together and really reporting on value for money. Also, what we're trying to do is to equip everyone that works at IRCC in settlement. So there's program officers and policy officers with useful information to help inform funding and other decisions. So for example, going way back to that $113 million for pre-arrival services, we get a new chunk of money, whatever money ends up actually coming to us, you know, divided by 5 years or whatever it may be, helping them understand where the best places to spend that money might be. So the last little bit, so the findings from our work will be used to inform ongoing program improvements and then also to shape new initiatives and pilots. So I touched on this a little bit earlier on when I kind of talked about testing. So let's take some of the findings we might find at a lower level, at a provincial level, and let's test those findings going out. So let's reach out to some of our organizational partners, our SPO partners, to see if they're willing to test a new way of doing things or a new initiative with a rigorous measurement system in place for us to really see if this works at a wider scope. So before we end up scaling up, let's start testing it. Let's run a pilot, all of those really exciting pieces of information or exciting initiatives to see if it works, and then to have it so that we can build that evidence base so that if we implement something within the entire settlement program, we're able to say this works. Our evidence points to this works for this population or for this service. So just to overview some of the key takeaways that we're hoping that everybody gets today is that iCARE data really provides the foundation for outcomes measurement. So all of that work I just talked about, all of the program improvements, understanding what works for certain populations, what doesn't work for certain populations, and understanding the path that a client follows in reaching particular outcomes. Another piece that I haven't really touched on is it might be the order in which people receive services or the speed at which people receive services. And I don't mean necessarily faster, it could be slower. So just understanding all of those pieces of information and how they impact outcomes. And iCARE data is truly, truly our foundation for that. We have no other way of knowing it otherwise. The data that we collect is really, really important for us to account for the program, to rationalize, and to protect the program's funding. So the reason we report every year is to secure funding. So that's kind of how the Treasury Board reporting, it's called the results annex, how that works every year. So we report on that, and you can see those results at a high level. I will send AMSSA the link to the website where you can see the higher level indicators that we have to report on, and that goes public as well. And that hopefully we can understand that this is why there's the timely and accurate data entry is really important to this work. So thinking about Rashad's individual, the GAR example that we went through, thinking about his individual data and how it is important that that data be entered in a timely way and in an accurate way, and then hopefully seeing how that might fit him into certain populations of research. So how his language assessments results, being a literacy learner, that kind of puts him into the literacy population, and that might be a population that we're looking at. Somebody who is receiving the NOC information for an employment service, we might be looking at a specific occupation category. So making sure that that information is as correct as possible will put him into that kind of sample population. So all of that is really, really important for us to be able to make the program better and to continue reporting on it. So just a quick piece here, and Justin will go over this as well. iCARE Helpdesk. So here's kind of an at a glance look. There are the hours. I tried to take into account all of the different time zones. So for BC, it's 5 a.m. to 2 p.m. There's the phone number, there's the local phone number, and then a toll-free phone number and the email. So that is it. I will leave this one up while we maybe take a few more questions, if that works for people. The next one is we usually use narrative reports to more accurately for more accurate client and service number if iCARE data doesn't indicate our service. How much will you count narrative reports? So this is a really good point. And the answer is iCARE is the way in which we understand how many clients and how many services are being provided and to whom. So while the narrative reports are helpful for us to understand other things that are going on, like from a administrative data point of view, when you look at those graphs that we had produced earlier that talk about whether it's clients and funding or clients and services, we use iCARE full stop. It's not feasible for us to go through all of the narrative reports to figure out where there may be differences. So iCARE is kind of the system of record for who our clients are and what services they receive. So the next one is a long one. I am going to kind of parse out the question here. So does IRCC plan to begin having mental health programs that work in parallel to the settlement support network? So I think that this is a good question, and part of this is being examined right now from a policy point of view, but another thing we need to be careful of is kind of IRCC's roles and responsibilities in relation to other government departments and other governments, so provincial or territorial governments. But it is definitely something that we have been looking into and continue to look into in terms of what is feasible to do. I believe in the most recent CFP, so 2 years ago now, there was an augmentation of mental health kind of capabilities of organizations. But I think so those are some of the considerations that we're definitely trying to understand. And this is a really good example of, we do collect in the needs assessment module, there's like health, mental health, and well-being as one of the non-IRCC needs. So that is really, really important for us to understand that of the needs, because we need to understand what the needs are. Because when it comes to a newcomer accessing health services or accessing mental health services, that's all in kind of a provincial database, which some of it is available to IRCC, but most of it is not. So it's really difficult for us to get a sense of those things. So it's important to think about how iCARE can capture some of this information to give us as much information as we can. And then this is another good example of where something like qualitative research, a case study, you know, really more specific pieces of information are really necessary, because it just can't be captured, you know, in the way that it should be in iCARE. What is a GAR? A GAR is a government assisted refugee. I'm sorry. Sometimes we get very IRCC focus. Is a government assisted refugee. So the refugee that are typically identified by the UN and brought into Canada and receive government assistance in the form of income support for a year. So that's what a GAR is. So there is a question about data being collected on possible cases of domestic violence conflicts in households receiving settlement services. So in iCARE, we do not collect this information for a variety of reasons. There are a lot of various pilot projects underway to collect this information, and this within IRCC, so not just within settlement. I think that this is kind of a area of interest and investigation for us to understand within the newcomer community writ large, what type of domestic violence or gender-based violence, domestic conflict issues may be undertaken. So that's a really good question. And I think something like the APPR might be a good place to report, not necessarily like attached to a client, but just in general about, you know, issues that clients may be facing, and help us get a sense of how big of an issue it may be, and whether it affects certain client groups, whether it be seniors or youth or, you know, whatever. All of that is a really good place to do that. But I do think we're definitely talking more and more about that internally. So the last question is, refugee claimants are not included in iCARE. So refugee claimants until their refugee claim is accepted, they're not eligible for services. So they may access services technically prior to becoming a permanent resident. Once they have, they can show proof that their refugee claim was accepted, and they're they might be in the process of getting the permanent resident the status. And I'm just going to make like a little quick correction here, is that iCARE is just a reflection of the settlement program. So whether or not somebody is in iCARE or not, iCARE is a reflection of the terms and conditions and the eligibility criteria as set out in the settlement program. So it's not necessarily about iCARE, if that makes sense. It's about, you know, the settlement program and what organizations are funded to provide. Who is reading the APPR besides the program officer? We use it as a data source. So because you put it into iCARE, we get it. It's just not necessarily quantitative data, right? It's, you know, the big chunks of narrative reports. So we do have people who go through it and kind of provide an analysis based on themes, like you kind of would with focus groups or with interviews, like with qualitative data analysis, you know, adding tags to some of the pieces and helping us understand those pieces of information. You'll see the APPR does feature pretty heavily in that outcomes report that I talked about earlier, because it does provide us with really valuable context information outside of kind of the quantitative pieces of information. So hopefully you can see it reflected in that report, how we do use the APPR. So I think what we'll do, I'm really conscious of time. Why don't we go into the second deck here? Rebecca, yeah.
I guess just one last thing I was going to talk about is we've also sent out the quick facts from last year. So that's just, again, a very high level view of how we use the data or what the data does tell us. So they can always refer to the quick facts as well, and that just gives us a glimpse of the settlement program. It's widely used within the departments, so it's, again, just a snapshot of the data that is extracted from iCARE and other data sources as well.
The next part of the presentation is going to be using the iCARE focus group questions kind of as a base, and Justin will be running this presentation. I think some of the questions that are in the Q&A might be kind of naturally answered during this, but I'll leave that up to Justin.
All right, so I guess the way this was worked is that there was an iCARE focus group, and out of that group, there was a bunch of questions posed. So that's how we've arranged this next deck, is basically parsed out those questions and then hopefully provided the answers according to those questions. Due to the context, I just want to be upfront that sometimes we do have to take a judgment call in terms of what the question is actually asking, because there's so much content behind this stuff that we do have to make some assumptions of what the question means and therefore provide the response to it. If for some reason the responses don't answer the question, then we can kind of look at the Q&A to see if it's better to respond there. And if not, then we can always deal with things after the fact and provide some more responses in writing. So we'll just jump right into it. These were the themes that were identified. And I think they were actually in order of basically the top question being about occupancy and enrollment, and then waitlist following, and so on and so on. So we're going to be talking about all these themes. Occupancy, waitlist, the functionality of the system. You guys had a lot of questions about reports, future updates, and then just a broad set of questions. So we'll jump right into it. So first and foremost, you guys had several questions regarding occupancy and enrollment. The best way we thought to address this was to provide, to answer several questions at once to provide you the gamut of information surrounding these questions. So question one being, can you clarify how occupancy rates are calculated? When is it best to open new seats / exit students so as not to impact your attendance and occupancy? The word open new seats, we have to make some assumptions. So again, we'll get into that when I provide the response. Currently, iCARE only allows for seats to be open monthly. And last, in the case that a client joins a class with continuous intake late in the month, opening a new seat in iCARE would negatively affect the occupancy rate. Is there a way IRCC can recommend reporting this? And could iCARE have more flexibility? So what I'm going to try and do here is kind of answer all these questions in the next couple of slides, and then we'll just go from there. So overview. So we're in touch base on the enrollment, attendance, and occupancy rates. And basically what I've done is broken these out into the 3 different calculations. So these calculations are based on monthly data. First, we have the enrollment rate, and this is describing how many seats are filled within the month. So the numerator here is the number of seats, the number of clients enrolled in the course, divided by the number of IRCC funded seats in the course. This terminology that we are using should reflect what you're seeing in the actual iCARE system when you're answering the questions in the course setup and the client attendance. So what I've done for each of these calculations is also provided you guys an example of how we do the calculation. So in the example we're providing, there was 5 IRCC funded seats, which 4 clients were enrolled. So we have an 80% enrollment rate. Next, we have attendance rates. This is regarding the student absenteeism. So this is the sum of all classes attended by all the students divided by the number of clients enrolled times the number of classes conducted. Again, these are all data points that you guys have entered, and we are just wrapping it all up and providing a rate based on those formulas. I will touch base on this more in the later slides, but the SPOs don't actually have this rate presented to them. The rate that you guys do see in the iCARE screens is pertaining to individual clients, and that's not what this rate is. This is an aggregate form. So just please note that if you've never seen this formula before, don't worry, it's more discussed later on. Last but not least, the famous occupancy rate. This rate is based on how full the seats are, or how filled up the seats are, and factors in attendance of all the clients that occupied a given seat during the month. This rate is not looking at individual clients, it's looking at a seat. So the calculation for this is the sum of all classes attended by all the students, so all the attendance, divided by the number of IRCC funded seats and the number of classes conducted in a month. So if we keep going back to the example we had at the very beginning, if we have a course that is 5 funded seats, there was 10 classes conducted, and one of the students attended all the classes and the remaining only attended 9, we basically use those numbers to get our calculation of 74% occupancy rate. The occupancy rate is in a nutshell and taking into consideration the enrollment rate and the attendance rate. So why does occupancy matter from our perspective? This is used from a funding perspective. So when we're looking at this data, we're looking at a lot of the information from 10,000 feet. So we need to know whether the seat was full, so occupied, as well as used. So was the attendance good? So IRC fund seats are full because the student is enrolled, and whether IRCC funds are used because students who are enrolled are also attending the class. As I'd already mentioned, occupancy rate takes both of these calculations into mind when looking at the scenario. Just going to point out a few scenarios just to show you how things may not be related. So when we look at low enrollment, this will not impact your attendance rate because there's no attendance to account for those clients that aren't enrolled in a class. Poor attendance will not impact enrollment rates, but low enrollment and poor attendance will have an impact on your occupancy rate. We do get a lot of questions surrounding this scenario. So if a student leaves mid-month, it will not impact your enrollment, your attendance, or occupancy rate if that student is replaced with a new enrollment or a new student. If that seat that is left vacant partway through the month, if it's not filled with a new client, then it will have an impact on the remaining factors. So these are some, again, some more scenarios. A course has students enrolled in all seats, but all the students are often absent. This course will have high enrollment, poor attendance, and a medium occupancy rate. A course has very few students enrolled, but the students that are enrolled have perfect attendance. So the scenario in the data will show that this course has low enrollment, high attendance, and medium occupancy rate. This is all pretty self-explanatory, but we just wanted to make sure that we put it into context for you. So what I've done here is I've provided 3 examples. I'll spend a little time on providing the context of how to look at the information, and then we'll just go from there. So for this example that I'm going to provide you context for in how we do the calculations, this is a scenario where the course is full, but students are absent. For those of you that are familiar with the iCARE screens, this is a snapshot directly from iCARE. So what we're showing here is the number of classes conducted in the month. So you can see in the month of November, there's a 4 at the top. That's telling us that there's 4 classes conducted. And as you can see, there are 5 students enrolled in this class. What you don't see, but we know in the background, is that this course is actually funded for 5 seats. So it's funded for 5 IRCC funded seats, and there's 5 students enrolled, and there's 4 classes offered in the month of November. So all I've done is breaking them out into the different calculations. If we want to calculate enrollment, we would look at the number of funded seats by the number of clients, and we know it's 100% because 5 of those clients are filling the seats at the moment. If we want to look at the attendance rate, again, we've kind of color-coded everything, so showing you all the attendance. That equals 14. The denominator is the clients enrolled times the number of classes conducted. And that gives us a 70% attendance rate. Last but not least, again, the famous occupancy rate. This is showing us the calculation again. The color code lets you know where we kind of extracted all the information. And in this scenario, where you have an enrollment rate of 100, an attendance rate of 70, we have an occupancy rate of 70% as well. So the next scenario I want to just, I have a little blurb here. The occupancy rate is 70%. Even in a scenario where 100% seats are filled is because, again, the attendance is below 100%. This next scenario, I've done the same thing, but the scenario is slightly different. This is an example where a course has very few students, but students that are enrolled have perfect attendance. And again, I won't go through it. It's exactly the same content. And after, if you guys want to refer to this, you can do that after the presentation. This scenario is, again, a question we get asked all the time. And it pertains to where a client attends all the classes available to them, but they leave partway through the month and is replaced by a new student. There's always a lot of questions of how this affects the occupancy rate and whether there's a negative consequence on the rate. And I'm hoping we'll be able to show that in this scenario that it does not. We've changed up the figures a little. We've just made this course, there's 2 funded seats and there's 10 classes in the given month. So what it's showing here is, again, in the month of February, we have 10 offered classes and the attendance for each individual. At the end of the month, we'll only have 2 clients enrolled because 1 client exited the class partway through. So what we did is we fulfilled that extra seat with a new client midway through as well. So the enrollment rate is still 100% because with the vacancy, we then filled in that extra seat. With the attendance, one of the seats was occupied 100% between 2 people, and which is fine. But one of the seats was only occupied by 80%. So for the entire month, we have a 90% attendance rate. When it comes to the occupancy, as I keep mentioning, we had 2 clients that fulfilled the attendance for 1 seat. And that is being captured in the numerator. So as you can see, we're capturing the attendance for both those clients. They both attended part of the month, which is 5 classes. And at the end of the day, we have an occupancy rate of 90%. I've kind of already pointed this point out to where I'm talking about that Jean-Luc has left partway through and then filled with Raymond. So the reason why we're not at 100% occupancy is because of the attendance of Nicole. We know that she missed a few classes. So that's what's brought down the occupancy rate. Where the seat being withdrawn partway through the month will have a negative impact on your occupancy is if a new client is not enrolled. Basically, if a new client's not enrolled, that tells us the seat was actually vacant for part of the month. So there's a lot of questions on opening new seats, when to exit, and how to enroll to ensure appropriate timing for the calculations. I just want to mention when we talk about opening seats, I'm not sure exactly what that terminology means, so I'm going to give two different scenarios. So in the Q&A at the first presentation, we did have a couple of questions about when is the data required to be entered into iCARE. At a minimum, as per your contribution agreement, you must be entering the iCARE data at least on a monthly time frame. And I think the clause states within 5 business days of the previous month. So at a minimum, you should be entering this information at least once a month. That being said, for the language training modules, we actually encourage the information to be entered more frequently. We recommend this to ensure that the information in the language training module is as up to date as possible. So when you guys are going into the screens, the information available to you is actually real time. The reason we want you to do this more often is because other service providers actually have information pertaining to your courses that are offered. For example, language assessors are able to see how many courses you're offering, what CLB level. And if you guys are waiting till the end of the month to exit a client, they won't see any vacancies to refer clients to your course. I'm just going to get back to opening seats. There's a couple of questions of when is it best to open new seats. This can be interpreted in 2 ways. Opening a new seat, I've interpreted as either adding an IRCC funded seat to the course. The total number of IRCC funded seats in a course is actually set out in your contribution agreement. The number of IRCC funded seats that you enter in iCARE during the course setup shouldn't match what is laid out in your contribution agreement. Making changes to the number of IRCC funded seats is not recommended at all because in most scenarios, your course funding will not change that often. If there does happen to be a change to the number of IRCC funded seats, that's a conversation you would have with your officer, and then you would reflect that information in iCARE. If it is going to happen, at the beginning of the month is the best scenario because it allows you to ensure that you're filling that seat at the beginning of the month with a new client. Amending the number of funded seats in a course should not be used as a way to facilitate data entry. And what I mean by that is, I'll jump to that. Sometimes you'll have an issue with enrolling a new client in a seat if all the seats are occupied. So what some SPOs are doing is inflating the number of funded seats so that they can actually enroll that new client. That is frowned upon because that will have a negative impact on your occupancy rate. In the second scenario, when we're interpreting opening new seats, we see this as exiting a client who has actually vacated the seat. Completing the data entry to exit a student that has left the course will open up that seat for a new enrollment. So if I leave partway through the month, by you exiting me from that course will allow you to enroll another student after I vacate that seat. This will not impact your occupancy as long as you are enrolling a new client into that seat. The timing of this data entry does not impact your rates as long as you are getting in that information at least by the 5th business day of the previous month. The rates are actually reflecting what is true of that course. So again, if you're not filling the seat, your occupancy rate will reflect that. Continuous intake. There's a lot of questions around in continuous intake and how that will impact your occupancy rate. So as mentioned on the previous slides, the term opening a new seat can mean one of two things. Again, changing the number of funded seats or exiting a student who has vacated the seat. The concept of continuous enrollment should not have any consequences on the number of funded or offered seats in a class from month to month. Continuous intake is the concept of allowing you to fulfill that seat if someone leaves the class. If you don't have continuous intake, you're not set up to fulfill the seat if someone is exited partway through the month or before the course ends. But again, I just want to emphasize continuous intake should not be used as a mean to change the number of funded seats. If a client is joining the class late in the month, this means one of two things. If the course was full, a seat will need to be vacated in order to enroll a new student. If the course wasn't full, the student can be enrolled at any time during the month to fill that vacant seat. I want to get into the sequence, even though this may seem very obvious. There is some requirements that are needed from the iCARE perspective that you must follow to ensure that you can follow the business rules associated to it. So exiting a student who has left the course, this has to be done. So you have to exit a client prior to enrolling a new client if the seats are full. This ensures that you vacate the seat and enables you to enroll the new student. The reason why this is important because it's my understanding not all the service providers enter directly into the iCARE system. They use a feature called bulk upload. It is not intuitive to understand this order when you're using the bulk upload. So you might be getting a lot of errors when you're enrolling new clients through bulk upload because you haven't vacated the seats. So again, if you are doing data entry on a more frequent basis rather than just at the end of the month, this will help alleviate the data entry frustrations that we here SPOs have at times. So again, you're going to exit the student and then you're going to enroll the new students within the given period. Again, kind of I've already emphasized that if you don't exit a student, it doesn't create that new vacancy in a course. Again, do not amend the number of seats in a course in a way for you to alleviate the stress with this data entry. If you inflate that number of funded seats, you will be held accountable to filling those seats. And if you're not filling those seats because you're not funded for them, then it will have a negative impact on your occupancy rate. Again, continuous intake will not have a negative impact on occupancy rates if the seats are filled once they're vacant. And again, you can refer back to the examples that I've done in the previous slides. Client attendance rates versus course attendance rates. When I was prepping for this presentation and I was going to look at the screenshots, I think something clicked and I realized why we're getting so many questions about individual clients' rates. And it seems to be because SPOs are referring to this portion of the attendance rate. This attendance rate that you're seeing is at an individual level, and it's for the duration at which the client is in the course. This is not an individual month attendance, it's for the duration of however long they've been in the class. I do want to point out that we don't refer to the attendance rate at an individual level. So on the iCARE screen, the client percentage of class attendance is an accumulation of all the client's attendance for the duration of the course. It is not a monthly rate. And why I wanted to point this out is because when we're looking at your data at aggregate level, we're not looking at individual clients, we're looking at the aggregate information for all the clients for a given month. So your officer doesn't actually have this piece of information at their disposal. What they do have at their disposal is that each and every month, they are given a report that has a breakdown of every course that you offer. And this breakdown has over 35 elements for them to review. Here are a few examples of those data points that they actually are able to review in this report. So they have the number of funded spots available. They have the total client enrollment for the month, the number of new clients. They know the number of clients that have exited. They have the enrollment rate. They have an occupancy rate. They know how many instructional hours are offered per class, and the number of classes attended of all the clients, as I mentioned, and the number of classes offered. I've put a few asterisks beside a few of these labels, and these asterisks are the information that we actually leverage to get your attendance rate. So again, if we want to know the attendance rate, we use a calculation to base off those parameters. And again, I just wanted to note officers don't have access to the individual client attendance. It's an aggregate information. So I know we've had lots of questions about when a client leaves partway through the class, they've attended 100% of the classes available to them, but it's showing 50%. Again, we don't usually go down into that information. The question is, COVID-19 has impacted occupancy and enrollment rates. For numerous pandemic-related reasons, placement is currently taking longer. At the same time, students are still attending classes regularly. However, many feel they are being penalized because of low occupancy. Is there a way for the calculation could be altered to reflect what is actually happening in the class? And can occupancy and attendance be separated? So again, I think these are all great questions. But what I wanted to point out is I think this is actually a perfect example of how the occupancy rate actually reflects what is going on in the class. And when we look at iCARE as a performance measurement system, by ensuring that the calculation does not change in how we report occupancy, it actually allows us to look at how the current pandemic has affected our occupancy. So I just wanted to make sure that, or emphasize that the fact that iCARE is staying consistent is a benefit to us when we're looking at the data. It being consistent allows us to do those comparisons from one period to another period. Concerns with how occupancy is being interpreted and used during the pandemic is actually an operational issue. It's not a system perspective. So if you do have questions about the concerns around your occupancy, those are issues that you could potentially raise with your officer. I don't think officers are taking 1 month into consideration when they're looking at your occupancy. They're looking at a trend. So if you have 1 bad month of occupancy, your officer might ask you some questions. But again, I think they're more looking at the consistency of throughout the year of how well you're doing. And I know Jared's on the line. I've put an asterisk beside this question to make sure that, to see if he has any questions from the ESM perspective to reflect what's needed to be talked to with their officers.
Yeah, I'll speak to this really briefly. I think I would second everything that Justin said, and definitely if there are any concerns, would encourage you to reach out to your officer. In general, we haven't been making changes. I don't even think I have to qualify that with in general. We haven't been making changes to number of classes being funded as a result of COVID. We're in the same place that you are with that, and that we're allowing this situation to play out while we continue to deliver the services that our clients need. And yeah, there's certainly some activities that we're seeing, whether it's language or others, a decrease in uptake, and somewhere we're seeing an increase. And we're not, as a general rule, amending agreements or making changes to reflect those temporary hiccups caused by COVID. And of course, we've heard in other contexts about levels plan and so on. So we know that we need to be prepared for clients who are eventually going to be placed in those classes, right? So I think the best thing to do is talk with your officer about your plan for, just how to make those adjustments to meet client needs right now. And then but understand that we're not seeing these occupancy and enrollment numbers is not meant to imply that we're looking for classes to be, the number of seats to be reduced, for example, in iCARE or anything like that. We're not looking for changes, so that the concept of being penalized, I would really caution, like that's not a word or an outlook that we're using at all, and I hope that helps.
So our next question, will occupancy and attendance rates be included with monthly iCARE reports sent to SPOs? So again, I think this is actually a great recommendation. I apologize up front that they're not sent to you. And there is a little bit of a frustration in how to find out. You have to go into your individual classes to find out your occupancy. So what we've done is we'll take all these suggestions in terms of functionality and reporting, and we'll go back to our teams and see if they can be resolved. Great recommendation. So I guess I will emphasize that we do have a separate iCARE team that does do the reporting, and that comes out of our CDO branch, and they're the ones who generate the reports. So I have made them aware of these recommendations, and we'll be in touch with them to help resolve some of the ones that we can. Why is there no centralized occupancy report instead of clicking, as I kind of mentioned? Again, thanks for your suggestion. We actually do encourage you guys in terms of from a functionality standpoint, if you guys are having issues or want to make recommendations, you can always email our help desk and we'll provide all that contact information for you at the end of the presentation. So again, appreciate all the recommendations, and we'll do our best to kind of resolve all the ones that we can. Please explain what is included in the enrollment field in the iCARE report. If I understand correctly, this pertains to a label in the PDF report that is sent to language training providers at the end of the month. If that is correct, the methodology is used as that it's any client that is actively enrolled in the class at the end of the month. This means that the start date is prior to or within the given month, and there's no exit day prior to the end of the month. So when we say enrolled, it's someone that is kind of actively engaged or enrolled in that class. So I'll take a pause here. I know there's a bunch of Q&As, and I'll just try and go through the ones that pertain to the slides that I've covered, because I know there was a lot of questions beforehand. And let me just take a quick glance. So the question is, filling a seat once is vacated assumes that the student leaving has given it advance notice they are leaving. Unfortunately, this is not always the case, and sometimes it can take time to contact waitlisted clients and for them to make the arrangements to enroll and fill the seat. Is there any way to present that scenario? Again, they kind of move around on me. They're kind of all jumping around, I think, with new questions. So in a nutshell, the occupancy rate is accurately reflecting what is going on the ground. As you said, sometimes there is a gap between a student leaving and a student filling that seat. The occupancy rate is providing us that information. Again, we're looking at it from 10,000 feet, and we need to know that we've funded, X program, and we're getting, X amount of use out of it. The occupancy is really what allows us to determine how often those seats are filled at any given time. Again, if you're having concerns with these scenarios, these are actually things that you would raise with your officer, because they are the ones that are looking at your monthly data. I don't think there's any need from an iCARE perspective to change any of the way the calculations are made, because again, I think I keep emphasizing it is an actual reflection of what is going on. I would also note that one piece of information is not usually enough to make a judgment about a scenario. So as we know, occupancy in itself is a combination of multiple factors. So occupation is giving us the high level, but we do need to dive into more information to get additional context. Again, whether it's an enrollment issue or whether it's an attendance issue. So again, the concerns around these and your rate and how they're being interpreted, I think those are things you'd have conversations with your officer. I'm really not sure what the best way to do this because I feel like they're jumping around on me as new questions are answered, but I'll do my best to find out, see some more that are pertaining to language.
Thanks, Justin. That could be because people are upvoting them. So
Okay.
if you could all refrain from upvoting at this time, that may prevent them from jumping around.
There's a question, many LINK students relocate after arriving in Canada. If LINK is a national program, why is iCARE not used across Canada? I am not a policy person. I don't know, Jared, is this a question that you would want to answer, or is this something I need to go back to our policy folks and actually provide a response?
Yeah, I don't think that I can answer it. I imagine that you know, it's in reference to iCARE not being used in Ontario. Is that right? And then
yeah,
but you know what? While I'm unmuted though, I just want to jump in back on the question about occupancy, enrollment, and exiting clients, and so on, and just clarify too that so we have. I mean, everybody wants to demonstrate that they're performing, you know, as best as they can. And obviously we're aware that we have targets as well, whether it's 80% enrollment or 100% enrollment, whatever the case may be. But exiting is normal and it's okay. And every program sees that. It's just a matter of entering the data accurately. And then that's why we as humans have those conversations as well, right? So when you talk about like a class that because I do pick up obviously on that concern that as a result of issues outside your control, and then that's exactly what we're going to see dealing with the high volume of clients that we deal with, that your enrollment for a very necessary and successful class, you know, or occupancy or attendance or any of these measures could drop, you know, below certainly 100%. Again, that's to be expected and put within context. Like at the higher level, I think we're starting to understand how this data is used and everything. But when it comes to the contract management, that's why we have, you know, narrative reports, conversations with your officers. We consider the wait list that, you know, that exists and so on. So, you know, again, there's a lot of context to the data too. And we're just looking, you know, in terms of inputting in iCARE, just having it accurate, but then that has to be followed up by conversations that are acknowledging the situation in real life.
Thanks, Jared. And sorry, I misread that question when I talked about why is iCARE not used across Canada. iCARE is used across Canada other than in Quebec. So other than, all I can say is it is used across Canada. Any service provider that is funded to deliver direct services is using iCARE. iCARE, in how you use iCARE and upload the information, there is a variety of ways to do that, but all I can say it is used across the country. Is it possible to calculate monthly uniquely? So I guess what I want to avoid is, my job here is to provide you the context in how it is calculated. I don't know if this is the place, or it's not actually my job to determine or to negotiate or to talk about how it should be. What happens is iCARE is a product of our policy and operational requirements. I do not make up, I say I, the royal we, when iCARE is developed. We basically approach our policy teams as well as our operational teams, and then we derive our business rules according to how things are done on the policy side. So I think what I'll do is I will move on to the next portion, and it pertains to waitlist. What is the timeline for phasing out the paper-based waitlist and referral system that is still happening in British Columbia? Many expressed a desire to see iCARE adjust their system so that paper-based referrals can be phased out. Again, this is an operation. I think I'm going to pass the baton on to Jared for this one. And I'll click on it to show what, yeah.
Yeah, so it is true actually that part of our process requires a paper-based referral. There's a little bit of an allowance for referring directly from the assessor in cases of, I think it's wrap clients or GARs, for example. But otherwise, that is true that paper-based referral system is used, and I think, as Justin's response here says, something for us to look at or consider with policy or operational in areas.
Thanks, Jared. Is there a procedure for emailing clients on the wait list like there is for calling? And again, Jared, I'm going to leave it for you.
Yes, so that is permitted. Calling and emailing are both equally valid options per the waitlist guidelines in iCARE.
Will there be any flexibility for waitlist procedures in rural community? On to you, Jared.
Yeah, we've kind of talked about this a little bit in the occupancy and enrollment, and I do notice that we're starting to run a little low on time, so I'll try to be brief. But again, like, there's all those contextual elements to these questions, and that's where you really want to have the discussion about your officer. The content of the presentation today is largely just about how do you put that information accurately in iCARE, and the earlier part, about how the information you've been putting into iCARE has been supporting the settlement program in meaningful ways sort of all along. But when it comes to the service offerings required in your community, that's another question. It is not predicated entirely on numbers that you see in your occupancy and enrollment, for example, so we have to have those conversations.
Given the flexibility during the pandemic, at what point can students be removed from the waitlist who do not reply to call-ups? Jared, again, another operational question.
Yeah, so we released some COVID-19 guidelines, and this was in May, which is forever ago at this point. And in that, we did suggest or recommend that clients not be removed if they can't be reached during the pandemic. I put that direction is currently under review, and it still is, but I've already heard back a preliminary response that, at this point, if you've tried numerous times to reach a client and you're unable to do that over the course of the 10 gosh, how many months has it been? Many months anyway, that you can remove them. We would also ask or suggest, though, that like clients choosing not to enter a class now because they're waiting for the pandemic to end so that they feel safe if they want to attend in person, for example, something like that. We don't want to remove those clients. It's just those who have not been able to be reached for a long period of time, and further information will be forthcoming on that.
Perfect, thank you. Why is the last day since last contacted counting while the date available to start class is far ahead? So the reason for this is to ensure that we have an accurate reflection of how many people are actually still waiting for a class. So what we do with start date available, that is if someone's not available to start a class for, I don't know, a couple months, you can put them on the wait list well in advance. But to ensure that they are still interested in the class when the class is about to start, we require SPOs to contact these individuals to ensure that they are still waiting for the same class. We know things are always changing from terms of whether they're still interested, so we want to make sure that our waitlist count is as accurate as possible. It allows us to ensure that when the date available, as I kind of mentioned, that the class comes around, we are actually presenting the number of people waiting and aren't including those who are no longer interested. The reason why it's important that you remove those clients is because the department is monitoring the number of clients waiting across the country on a monthly basis. I personally provide data to for a dashboard that we do on waitlists, and it goes up to our senior management. So on a monthly basis, they are getting the report showing the number of clients waiting for waitlists. So it's extremely important that we're keeping those numbers up to date. So the next section of the questions pertains to functionality. Can iCARE prevent clients from being enrolled in multiple online linked classes simultaneously? If this is not possible, would it be possible to add this function? It could be easier. It could be similar to the waitlist system, which highlights how many and which classes clients are waiting for. So this is a great recommendation. I guess we just wanted to flag some negative consequences of putting such a restriction in the system. We want to avoid any scenario in which iCARE becomes the barrier to which a client can receive a service. If SPOs are not keeping their data up to date and accurately reflecting the actual scenario, there could be a situation where a SPO is rejected for a service because iCARE says X, Y, Z. So I don't see us actually implementing a system restriction. But what I do see us potentially being able to do is that we can look into options in flagging clients that are attending multiple courses. The reason why this is not a big restriction in the system is because it may not be a national policy. It's my understanding that some regions potentially do things differently. They manage their agreements slightly differently. So we always have to take into consideration that iCARE is a national system, and that when we implement rules, it's consistent across all regions of the country. Obviously excluding Quebec, because they have a different program. So it is a great recommendation that you guys are basically looking for some type of flag, and we can look into those potential feature in the future. So next, we are going to focus on reporting. I know there was a lot of reporting Q&As. In the monthly report sent by iCARE, is it possible to extend the top 10 list of demographic information, perhaps to 15? I guess this would be helpful. So again, I think this is a great recommendation. We have sent this comment and question to our reporting team so that they are aware of all these suggestions and they can look at options in updating our reports. I can't guarantee you all these suggestions or recommendations will make it into the system, but I think it's a great way for you guys to give us feedback to enhance our reports and how the system works. So thank you. Is there any possibility of expanding graphical presentation of iCARE data? Is it possible to have a live reporting dashboard? So again, you guys are looking for more information more frequently. And again, appreciate those responses. I do know, and this is again a very high level, work is being done at the department level to enhance all their systems reporting capacities. And I can only imagine iCARE is part of that conversation as well. So again, I've sent this to our reporting team and they're aware of such scenarios that you guys are looking for. So thank you. Is it possible to align demographic characteristics to match quarterly reports? And the example is September to December. I just will say up front that different CAs or contribution agreements have different reporting requirements. So it is hard to meet everyone's needs. We've tried to keep it fairly generic, but clearly there's some gaps in those reports, and all we can do is go back and see if we can fix things such as that. So again, thanks for the recommendation, and we've forwarded this on to our colleagues who manage the reports. Will there be changes to the reports received back from iCARE? It is very hard to cross-check against CA activities. My first thought, it's my understanding that the iCARE reports do actually break down the number of clients served by activities. If you have an activity in your contribution agreement that says you're to deliver 100 INO group sessions, if you go to the INO report, it will actually break out your INO sessions by group, one-on-one, and family. So you're able to get a unique client count for that level of activity. Where iCARE cannot distinguish between two activities is if you have two activities that deliver slightly different programming. So if you have two INO sessions that are delivered in groups, if you have two targets for INO that are delivered through group sessions, iCARE will not be able to distinguish between those two different program needs. And the same is for if you had 2 employment-related counseling activities in your CA. Again, we're not able to break out the nuance between the 2 different activities. But again, if you have an individual activity, iCARE reports should be able to break out the information at that level. The next subject, future updates. By design, I made this super slow because, we don't always make changes as quickly as we like, but again, we're doing the best we can. Can you provide information on the adjustments that have been made to iCARE due to COVID-19 pandemic? I think I kind of mentioned this at the very beginning and in reference to our previous deck, is that the consistency in iCARE is actually its benefit. So there have not been very many changes to iCARE as a result of COVID-19. And again, this is by design so that we can monitor different trends in how things are being either delivered or received over a duration of time. That being said, there has been a few updates to the system in terms of data collection. From a functionality standpoint, iCARE has not been changed. We haven't changed the due dates. We haven't changed anything pertaining to that. But in an effort to get us better information from a policy perspective, we have added a new question on delivery format. So for those of you that use the system on a regular basis, you'll know that we now collect information on the format of service, of whether it's delivered online, in person, over the phone, and scenarios such as that. We have also included new assessment tools. And the reason for adding those new assessment tools is because those tools were created to be done online. So those are new tools that are being delivered in the context of COVID, of a lot of services being delivered online. So we wanted to make sure that we knew what tools were being used during the COVID era. Many of the concerns that you guys have raised as a result of COVID-19 pertain to how a CA is managed and monitored, and not necessarily the system itself. So again, if you do have concerns in how your CA is monitored or managed, or things that fall under that nature, again, we recommend you talk to your IRCC officer. So that's kind of by design, is why I've been going back to Jared for several of these questions, is because he is on the operational side and it's a little arm's length for me. So I do not have the information and it falls into his wheelhouse. So it would be convenient to be able to see the overall occupancy enrollment rates for the whole program. Again, we appreciate the recommendation, and we'll bring this up with our development team. So I think we are close to the end. So these were just, I guess, a gamut of questions that didn't necessarily fall into other categories. So it says, iCARE is currently used as a reporting tool. Are there plans to make it more user-friendly as a data retrieval system? Are there any plans to enhance iCARE with data retrieval client management tool? So I guess we've kind of partially answered this question in terms of giving the context of what iCARE is and isn't from the performance measurement perspective. So I would like to acknowledge first that iCARE, we are well aware that iCARE has fallen short on the data extraction retrieval capabilities. You guys are very limited of what information you have from the iCARE system. And right now that limitation is to the PDFs. We acknowledge those PDFs are, there's a lot of information, but at the same time, there may not be information in the format that is required for you. So again, we apologize, and we're looking into ways to resolve this. And it does have to do with the work that the department is doing to enhance their systems, to do some updates to their reporting features. From a data perspective, from a data entry perspective, there are no intentions to move iCARE towards a client management system. as we kind of keep mentioning, it's very performance-based. iCARE is funded as a PM system, not a client management tool. So as a result, we're actually limited in what information we can actually collect. There's privacy and security restrictions that we have to abide by, and we have to make sure we stay within the scope of the purpose of iCARE and how it can be used. We kind of get this all the time in terms of that either iCARE doesn't collect enough information or it collects too much. So we're always kind of playing that balance of fitting right in the middle of collecting what is required for us to be able to do what we need. I would like to reiterate, and I think we covered this in our first presentation, is from a department perspective, iCARE has been extremely instrumental to what data has been available to us for the forms of evaluations, to make evidence-based policy decisions, from an outcome analysis perspective, and from a monitoring CA perspective. So again, it's been seen as kind of a black hole from the SPOD perspective. We hear that all the time as we keep entering all this information and don't see anything out. I will just I can't emphasize enough of how important it is and how appreciative we are for the information that is there. We use this on a daily basis, and me especially. Any upcoming changes to functionality fields? It says to the templates. The templates reflect what the system says. So if we make a change to the system, it's automatically reflected in the templates. So I was I didn't know how much information to give. All I can really tell you is that we have made a request to make some minor changes to the system. And that is with our IT people. We had to fall within a queue of IT development changes. So at this point, all I can really tell you is that we have made some proposals for the employment module and some very basic label changes for support services. So there's been some nuance to the labeling of support services. We just want to make sure those nuances have been updated in the system. And in terms of the employment changes, there's no point in me getting into them because we're not really sure when or how those changes will be implemented. So I guess my next questions are really, if you guys can give us feedback, and it doesn't have to be right now, it could be through the help desk. What do you guys want to see in terms of notices of when we do iCARE updates? Is there a specific format? Is there a specific way you would like to see us advertise the changes? And what timing works best for you? We always have to take into considerations the timing of the month in regards to reporting. So we do have some restrictions in when the changes can be updated. But again, if you guys can give us some feedback, we can kind of implement that into how things are done from our end. We're almost at the end, and thank you guys for bearing with us. I know this has gone a lot longer than expected, and I apologize for that. Have there been any changes to data entry deadlines? I'll just quickly say no. Your deadline is still by the 5th business day of the following month as per your CA. And if needed, you can talk to your officer if that's not working for you. Again, it's a management operational requirement, not necessarily an iCARE requirement. We're just implementing the rules that have already been in your CA into the iCARE system. I will note that the iCARE system does allow you to backdate information for up to 90 days. And that is, again, for exceptional circumstances in which you can meet the 5th business day. So I don't want to make that the rule. It's the exception to the rule. I'll just emphasize why it's so important that you guys enter on a regular basis and consistently. Again, I've kind of mentioned that we use the data on a monthly basis. I provide data for a COVID dashboard to our senior management. I do an operational dashboard. Our SN colleagues do an operational dashboard. And we also do the waitlist dashboard. Again, this is on a monthly basis. Can you talk about programming to accommodate learners with digital literacy? Jared, I don't know if you want to jump into here, as this is an operational question.
Yeah, if I missed the mark on this, I'll send please feel free to send an email or anything, but I'm assuming that this question just speaks to how we're rolling out programming remotely or hybrid models right now. And I would just say that, like the the virtual summit, and even we've had AMSSA lecture on settlement and technology, and there's a lot of work in different forums looking at how we can do that. But we're interested in, you know, how we can deliver remote service delivery and how we will even mainstream some of that long term. So definitely, if you have ideas or needs, bring those up to your officer. Where we fund, you know, a lot of the technology that's required, and even in a lot of cases there's newer changed responsibilities to some positions about, you know, like instructing that digital literacy a little bit or whatever the case may be. So I hope I didn't completely miss the point on that question, but it's definitely something that's important, and something to talk to your officer about.
Where should we go for help? Great question. There is multiple ways that you can contact the iCARE help desk, which we had slide in the previous one. It's either by email or by phone. You can contact the iCARE help desk. If you will be contacting them regarding anything presented during this presentation, please reference this. I am arm's length from the help desk. I am on the policy side. I don't, yeah. So again, I need them to forward the emails to us. I'm kind of the third in line to get the questions. If no one else can resolve the question, we are last in line to deal with the questions. So you might hear from a variety of different people. All we do is emphasize that you provide as much context as possible. If you do call, sometimes it might be best that you do follow up with an email to provide as much context as possible, so that when it gets relayed to myself or someone on the team, we have that context versus someone trying to interpret the phone call into an email. So I suggest you might start with a phone call and then provide it in writing if more information is needed. Can you change type of service location to multiple answers instead of choose one? I thought this was a great recommendation. I wasn't sure if this was posed prior to the changes that we've actually made in iCARE. I've highlighted those three options in red only because we've actually removed those questions from the location question and put it as a standalone question, and that is the service delivery format. That is a choose all option, select all that apply. So if the service was delivered on phone and in person, you can select both. And that data entry was updated as of October 2020. We'll continue to monitor and look into the scenario in terms of making the select all for type of location. I want to raise a little bit of caution of this scenario because of the nuance of whether the continuation of the service is a new service in the location or a continuation of service. And the nuance there is how you do the data entry. If it's a continuation of the same service at a different location, you would amend the record that you've already created. If it's a brand new service, you would create a new service in iCARE. And the following points are just explaining that context. Is it possible to collect data on childcare classes? A quick no, that's not really the purpose of what we're collecting when it comes to childcare. What we are collecting for the support service is what clients that are receiving the service are also receiving a support service to participate in our settlement programming. So the goal is not really to be focused about the childcare class itself and the vacancies within that. Again, it's pertaining to either the parent that's receiving the service and requires a support service. Is there a possibility of integration with other case management tools? The data fields in iCARE are not comprehensive enough. Again, I hope I've provided enough context to kind of answer this question before you've even gotten to the answer. That's not the purpose of iCARE. It's not a case management system, although it is capturing information on whether the client itself was part of the case management initiative. We have program types in iCARE as a data point. You would select that that client was part of the case management program. But again, outside of that, we're not collecting more information. Can the search function be improved? Can a reporting function be added? All I can say is yes, yes, and yes. These are all things we're actually working on and want to actually add to the system. So again, great question and recommendation. we will be, again, lining this information up with our IT team to improve iCARE's usability and functionality. As I've kind of mentioned, the reporting feature is on our radar, and we hope to have that feature sometime in the future. I can't make any promises though. Can you describe the limitation of course availability? There wasn't a lot of context with this, so I just looked at it from the highest level possible. The limitations in terms of the data that you see within iCARE is actually related to how or when SPOs are entering the information into iCARE. If SPOs are not adding their information in the iCARE on a regular basis, well, then that course availability will not be as updated as possible. It all comes down to the timely data entry that other SPOs are doing. And again, I'm emphasizing that we recommend it more, doing data entry more so than not, so that language trainers and assessors can see the most recent information or the most up-to-date data available to them. Is it possible to simplify data entry so staff do not have to enter client information for each service? I'm not sure if this is in regards to how clients are validated, so how you put in the UCI and date of birth every time. Unfortunately, that is the process. I don't necessarily see it changing, so I do apologize. At the moment, there are no, as we say, no indications that the data will change. That being said, there are different tools in how you upload information into iCARE. We have what we call the GUI interface, which is when you're logging into iCARE and you do it screen by screen. We have the bulk upload feature, which is used by service providers that have the technical ability to track the information in their own database and then extract the information into a bulk upload, which is then uploaded into iCARE. And then we have the group validation tool, which some of you are familiar with. There are resources available on how to use each of these tools, and that's under the resource tab when you're in iCARE. What should we do when work done does not clearly fall under one service? This really sticks out to me because if the services you are delivering doesn't necessarily fall within the module that you're entering the information into, one red flag is that potentially the activity that you're delivering is not actually the appropriate module you're entering into. Sometimes what we see is that the activity is an employment related service, but you're entering under the I&O module. So there's a little bit of a disconnect. So in these scenarios, we actually recommend you contact your IRCC officer or make your IRCC officer aware. And they can kind of work with our team to make sure that there is an appropriate match between the activity and your iCARE permissions. Can an option for reporting accompaniments be added to community connections? I can't give a straight answer to this because of the nuance. There's so many different scenarios, whether the service is actually funded and therefore whether it should actually be captured. So if this is a question that I'm hoping that someone can do a follow-up email to the help desk, and then we can get back and look deeper into the question. Here's another scenario. They've provided a scenario in which they deliver a link class, and they're giving us a specific scenario. Again, I don't want to provide a response through this forum. I think it's best that we go back, we look into your actual activity, find out as much information as possible, and then provide you the guidance on how to enter it into iCARE. We want to make sure that different the same scenarios have the same data entry formula. So please touch base with us after. Is there training available for entering groups into iCARE, such as Conversation Circle? My understanding of this question, it pertains to the group validation in iCARE. There's a tool or a mechanism that is used to lump together a group of individuals and create an iCARE record. This is to help reduce the reporting burden. My understanding, there is a a resource available in explaining this feature. So again, you can go into the iCARE under resources and look at the manual for group validation. This question again deals to group validation. It's asking when reporting individual sessions for multiple clients as a group, choosing the option individual from the service received dropdown, will iCARE count that as an individual service or a group validation? Again, the group validation feature is just a tool. It does not dictate what or how the information is being flagged. The fact that you use a group validation does not mean that the session will be categorized as a group session. You have to select the option group session or individual, and whatever option you choose in that drop-down menu will be reflected in the client's record. So again, just because you're using the group validation tool does not mean that that session is categorized as a group. Great question though. Currently, iCARE does not allow you to review a student's history prior to when you started working. It's not the iCARE, iCARE restricts based on the date of a contribution agreement which you have given permission for. So it's not when you joined iCARE that's the limitation. The limitation is by contribution agreement. So if you joined in 2017 and you had a contribution agreement that ended in 2016, and you're only given permission to the 2017 CA, you will only be able to see those records. If you're interested in those previous records, you have to ask your ED for permission on those contribution agreements. And if you're having to, if this is a little bit muddy in terms of what I mean, you can always contact our help desk and they will provide you further context. But great question. So that is the end. This is the contact information for our help desk, which we've actually already covered several times. Okay, I will do my best to start from the top to the bottom and go through all the FAQs. Again, if you cannot vote on these so they don't switch around, that'd make things much easier for me, so thank you. The client status is changing. Some clients become citizens and not eligible for some services. Is it possible for us to verify the client from the updated status in iCARE? I think I already kind of covered this. We want to avoid iCARE being a restriction to a client receiving a service. So we never want iCARE to say one thing and that it not actually be true. So iCARE will never be the system to determine whether a client is eligible for a service. That requirement or that obligation falls on you as a SPO to ensure that your clients that you're serving are actually eligible. There is some flexibility in this though. If a client is receiving a service and such as language training, and they do receive their citizenship in midway through their service, my understanding is they are allowed to continue receiving those services. So they're allowed to end the service that they've already started. So that would be my answer for that question. So iCARE will not limit it, but yeah. Due to working from home, is the location of service from the SPO's representative's home? Should we enter the SPO's the home's postal code? So I'm going to go by memory here. I'm guessing this pertains to the postal code question that we asked for the service. If you are at your own home, oh my God, I'm drawing a blank on this. I will have to look at the specific FAQ on this question. I was going to say it's you put in the postcode for where you live, but I do not want to make that mistake and make that the gospel if it's not true. So I do apologize. I will have to go back into their FAQ to find out the exact response to that. So I do apologize for not having that at the top of my head. A lot of these questions, that being said, a lot of these questions actually do have an answer in our resource form. There's a lot of frequently asked questions. There's a lot of definition documents. So my guess is that that question is actually answered in one of those documents. But again, I will try to find out for you. If I report a PR client for the first time at any point during the fiscal year, they're considered a new client, right? If yes, would you remain as a returning client until the last day within the same fiscal year? This is the way a client is calculated, either new or returning, is dynamic. It all depends on the parameters that we are reporting on. If for this scenario that you've described, if you are looking at a fiscal year and you are looking at a report that says new and returning, and the duration of that report is for a given fiscal year, the client is considered new if they have never received a service in that fiscal year before. If they've received a service in a previous fiscal year and you're looking at the next fiscal year, they will be considered returning. So it's very hard. There's a excuse me. There's a million different scenarios in which determine how they're being counted. So it's hard to talk about all the scenarios, but when we're looking at a fiscal year, it's whether they've received their first service that fiscal year. And again, I think there is some documentation in the resource field for this. Can you elaborate the item in I&O regarding the interpersonal conflict? Again, I'm going off the top of my head, but I think this is relating to the topic of interpersonal conflict. Basically, if that is correct, there should be a document for definitions for I&O, and interpersonal conflict would have a specific definition of what is considered interpersonal conflict that you would then select it. So in a nutshell, interpersonal conflict deals with when an individual is dealing with another individual and there's conflict between the two, and you as a service provider are giving them strategies or information on how to deal with those conflicts. That's in a nutshell what we're looking to capture. Who is reading the UPPR? I think Justin answered that. It's the officer as well as the outcomes team and all of the policy folks. We leverage that information for the qualitative information in there. So I'll quickly go over that one because it's been answered. Can you explain how you calculate returning clients? I'm hoping that was answered in my previous question. It's all dynamic. If you're looking at a fiscal year for any service, it's whether they received a service previous to that year for any given service. If we're looking at a specific service such as NARS, if the client has received a NARS in a previous fiscal year, in the next fiscal year, they'll be considered returning. If they're brand new to NARS, they'll be considered new. Again, it's really hard to give context because there's so many different scenarios and it depends on which report we're looking at. How do you count services, just by record or by day? It is by record in iCARE. So every time you click that new button, that is considered a new service. It's very important that you do not create a new service in a scenario where a client is continuing a service. So if a client has showed up today for a service and you've also booked time tomorrow for that service to continue, do not click new service. What you will do is you'll edit the current record and you'll increase the duration of time that you spent with that client, as well as change the end date of service. By you doing those two factors, increasing the time, changing the end date, we know that that service has been increased. Excuse me. And we know that information. We really want you to avoid creating new services in a scenario where it's a continuation. iCARE data in the reports you are showing, does it cover all employment related service for EX under settlement employment related service or career paths, or are they separate?
I'll just add that career paths is a specific employment related program that we do fund, and we did amendments recently this year to incorporate those into CAs that include other activities, whereas career paths used to be a standalone agreement. So just maybe you can confirm this, but when it's a standalone agreement, you see a report that just includes the activities in that agreement. And then when once it's merged into a CA that includes other activities, you're going to see all the employment related career paths and non-career paths in the same report.
That is exactly correct. That's perfect. Yeah. What is the deadline of reporting services? Again, as per your contribution agreement, it's the 5th business day of the following month. Is it possible to calculate occupancy monthly unique? Again, this is kind of a question of how we do the calculation. What I suggest is hopefully we'll get, if we can get a report of all these questions, we'll look at this. If it's something that is possible, we talk to our policy folks and operational folks, and then we determine the best way forward. I really don't want to get into potential ways that we could do it in the future. Again, my job was to kind of emphasize how it is currently done. So on data perspective, how do you measure data when newcomers go to different agencies with the same issues? We don't, at the individual level, we're not necessarily looking at that information at that granular level. Remember, we're looking more at the highest level. So there's not much I can really respond to on that because we don't look at individual client level. Everything is always aggregate. In iCARE, there are Arabic and Arabic Syrian. Why the division? I will have to look into that. That's the first time I've seen that. I will say we do draw from a secondary database for all the list of options. So potentially there was a need somewhere else and therefore we're mimicking it. But I can definitely look into that and see if there actually is a nuance between the two. But I don't have a clear direction on that. Are we going to see in the future a specific section for data on Swiss? iCARE doesn't reflect how we do our work. iCARE will capture clients that are participating in the Swiss program. Again, we have that program type drop-down list. If you deliver the Swiss program, you should have the option of Swiss for you to flag all the clients that are participating through the Swiss program. Why don't we basically capture information directly pertaining to Swiss? Again, that's not necessarily the goal of iCARE. The policy leads on the Swiss program, they are aware of those nuances. So when they look at the iCARE data and how many services and clients, they have a lot of that context in the background. So we don't necessarily have to collect additional context on how that service is being delivered because there's experts in the Swiss field that would have that content. Again, if your officer needs additional information, they would be able to speak to you directly on your regarding your SPO and the services being delivered. What is the iCARE deadline for iCARE reporting? I know this question has been asked a few times. I'm not sure if it's because it's not clear or and potentially I'm not answering the question effectively. So if not, I sincerely apologize. I think I've answered that in terms of the 5th business of the following day. So it's due on a monthly basis. Sometimes it is difficult to accept more students because the sessions are connected. I think I read that. I'm not necessarily sure what the question actually means. So I can't really answer it. I suggest you email the help desk and then we can maybe talk to you one-on-one to deal with it. Is it a good idea to over-enroll students in class by 1 or 2 students because other classes have less enrollments or over-enrollment should not be done? That is an operational question. I at the get-go, no, you should not be over-enrolling a class. That's causing you to inflate the number of funded seats. And again, your number of funded seats at the course level should reflect your CA. And if you're over-enrolling that course, you're kind of hurting yourself with the occupancy rate because once that client leaves, you're there having a vacant seat and that will show negatively. We also do not want you fluctuating the number of funded seats because from month to month, it's going to change the formula that was used to calculate occupancy. because it's pulling from the different numbers. And therefore, we're not able to see that trend from month to month. So I will strongly advise against this. From a data entry perspective, that's my view. If there's operational requirements, I think we would have to talk with your officer for us to get that context and see if there is an exception to the rule. But I'm going to stay on the side of caution and say it's not recommended or encouraged. Is it possible, just iCARE, to see the number of hours that an individual attended in total? Off the top of my head, there's no way to do that. And again, when we're looking at ways to improve the system, we can use that as an example to see if that's something that we can add. Would there be any concerns or challenges if online teaching learning will continue coming new school year? Or what is the stand of IRCC about this?
So, I mean, I think that, you know, we've all given up, I think, predicting the future, but absolutely, we are expecting online service delivery to continue to be a necessity in most locations. And we want to support service providers in delivering services to clients so that's safe for clients and, you know, instructors. So online service delivery is really important to us right now in COVID. And then even looking forward, I think we see a lot of value in that, but that's where it gets a little less clear and where we really need to have some discussions. And it's probably still too early, to be honest, but how does that remote service delivery fit into our long-term plans? And a lot of that will have to do with what do your clients need to access service as well, right? So a big discussion to happen there, but the short-term answer, absolutely, we're going to continue to see online delivery.
If a student exits in the middle of the month, would the student be considered enrolled in that month? Or only those who enrolled as of the last day of the instructional hours? If they exited partway through the month, at the end of the month, they would not be considered enrolled. They would be considered exited. iCARE templates were updated on March 3rd. Within 5 business days, which brought some inconveniences. It is possible for iCARE to do such yeah, that is it possible for iCARE to do such updating after the 5th business days? That's a great recommendation. That is usually how things are done. That being said, when there's a large release, we do take that into consideration. If things are changed partway through the month, the templates would be updated partway through the month. I'm just totally talking out loud in terms of how it works. But yes, that is usually the rule of thumb that we follow to help you guys to make sure that the data entry there's no glitches in between. We always attempt to do the update after the 5th business day. But obviously we've missed out in a scenario, and we will definitely take that into consideration, and I apologize. When I say I do mean the royal we. I do not control everything and anything. I have a very small part, so I do work with a lot of other people when it comes to iCARE. Would it be possible to add choose not to answer option in the gender field to accommodate LGBTQ+ community? I will emphasize, I'm making the assumption this pertains to the target group. The target group question does not identify the individual as that category or label or demographics. The question is, did they participate in a session that entailed a specific demographic? Just because a client participated does not identify that individual as that demographic identifier. So just because the session was targeted towards LGBTQ+, doesn't mean we label those individuals. We do not put labels on individuals. According to iCARE, what we do use is the GCMS database, which is our immigration system. When newcomers come to the country, they enter all their demographic information into the GCMS system. So iCARE is not used to identify individuals. So I hope that gives you some context that we are not using those labels in that way. Although I will actually emphasize more about the question of target groups, we do see a lot of services where there have been no target groups identified, yet we know those services are tailored towards a specific demographics. So again, we are constantly reviewing this, and we've seen misrepresentation in the data from the target group perspective. So I do highly encourage that service providers do use that field more often to identify the target group of the service. I'll give a quick example. We know some language training services are tailored specifically towards seniors, but yet we don't see that in the data when we see whether it is targeted towards seniors. Since we use a third-party CRMS, we do monthly bulk uploading. For any iCARE system changes, please leave enough time for third-party making changes, and we could upload correct data into iCARE. So I'm not familiar with your third party, but obviously you use one and you needed more advance notice. I don't think it has to do with when we make the update. I think what you're looking for is advance notice of these changes. And I think that's a great recommendation, is that we can work with our iCARE team and how those changes are distributed. Sorry, I'm finding it hard to find my words. So again, great feedback. I really do recommend those comments to our functional guidance help desk as well. Is it okay to report iCARE on the 5th of the month? Is it okay to report iCARE on the 5th of the month at the end of the day?
And the next part of the question is, or should it be morning time?
So the time of date of which it was entered is irrelevant, because when we do the extract, it's after the 5th business day. So basically up to the midnight, it's not even midnight. It's as long as this, yes, I'm going to say midnight, I apologize. So morning or night, it doesn't matter. The automated system will extract that information after the 5th business day. So if you've met that threshold of the 5th business day, the data will be included in the reports. If
And can
for
I
some
just,
reason,
sorry, Justin, is that an Eastern Standard Time, or based on time zone?
the extract is usually the next day of like next business morning. So I think the time zones are potentially irrelevant in terms of whether it's Eastern or Pacific. So yes, it would include Pacific data if you entered it at midnight in Pacific time, because the extract's going to be the next morning. Don't use that as an excuse to delay your data entry. So that's why I was kind of hesitant to answer it, because I don't want that to be seen that you guys have additional hours to enter it. I would just encourage you to do it by the 5th business day of that night. If for some reason you do miss that threshold and the data is not included in your monthly reports, the system does backdate all of its extracts and will include it in the next month. So the only thing is you're 2 months behind in that data versus you having it the most recent month. So again, that's why I caution you not to do that. For backdated up to 90 days, can iCARE go with the service date and end date and not, sorry, for backdated up to 90 days, can iCARE go with service end date, but not service start date? Some of the services are longer than 90 days, plus monthly uploading delays. We can't indicate our work fully in iCARE. If you're waiting 90 days to enter the information, I think you are not necessarily abiding by the requirements. So I would encourage you not to wait the 90 days. That feature is a system flexibility. Again, I keep emphasizing your CA dictates what is required from the data entry perspective, and that's on a monthly basis. In the circumstances that you, again, fall within the scenario where you can't backdate the start date within the 90 days, you are to backdate it as close as possible. So you might need to alter your start date and end dates. If your start date was actually 5 days before, but that's 95 days, you would amend then your start date to 90 days, and then you would push back your end date those 5 days that you had to adjust your service record. Make sure their thresholds are staying the same if you have to do your start date within those 90 days and the service start date was actually beyond the 90 days. So again, I'm really hoping those are the exception to the rule. Yeah, I hope that answers the question. I would like to echo one previous question on postal code. For SPO's rep home location, shall we put SPO's postcode or representative? Again, I need to get back to you on that question. I think we've laid it out in an FAQ document or a definitions document. I don't want to give the misinformation at this point because I don't have it right in front of me. So we will get back to that one. How do you calculate service duration? Is it dependent on service date? Then again, when services is over 90 days, iCARE record can't be edited. Should we break the service into two data service entries? In scenarios in which we know services do span longer than 90 days, the system will allow you to have a service beyond those 90 days. An example is employment or community connection. In many scenarios, a community connection service might entail a conversation circle that spans over 90 days. If my memory serves me correctly, I am under the impression that a community connection can span longer than 90 days. If I'm wrong, I will eat my words and I will send us everyone a notification that this is not accurate. But I can say that for employment-related services. Employment-related services we know can span longer than 90 days, and therefore we allow those services to actually have a start date and end date longer than 90 days. If the scenario is in a module that doesn't let you span over those 90 days, then yes, you would create a start date and end date within those 90-day periods. And then once those 90-day periods are up, you would create a new service entry, and it would be 2 data entries. Yes, that is how you would do it. When a CA ends, will iCARE automatically remove all client service records based on IRCC requirements? I'm not necessarily sure what that question references. I'm sorry, I don't know.
This might be, it might be a reference to data protection, and after a certain period of time, this is just me speculating, like if a client isn't receiving service anymore, the information has to be
yes.
Yeah, so if that
Perfect.
helps.
That is exactly what I needed to hear. Thank you. There are data. All I can say is I don't know what the rules are, but the department adheres to the requirements as legislated in terms of how long we hold on to the information. Again, I don't know what those time periods are, but there is a threshold. It is not as soon as the CA ends. There is a legislation that we abide by. So I hope that does answer your question. Why is Quebec not used? The immigration program is different in Quebec. They have the Canadian-Quebec Accord, and they run their own programming in Quebec, and they're given money by the federal government. There's a Canada-Quebec Accord if you're interested in learning more about it. That's basically the gist of it, is that they manage their own settlement program. So that $780 million that we talked about does not include the Quebec Accord. In regards to gender question, I mean that a person may not identify as male or female, so they won't want to choose either male or female. I'm just trying to think. We don't actually ask that question. I don't think we ask a gender question in iCARE. Our immigration, our GCMS system where we actually collect the demographic information has expanded to reflect a scenario where individuals do not want to identify male or female. Off the top of my head, I forget what that label is identified as, but there is a specific identifier that they can select if they're not interested. So I hope that does answer the question. Again, I'm not sure if I was clear on that. Midnight Eastern time, I believe. We'll go with that. Although I don't think it's down to that precise. For returning clients under employment-related service, should we just amend the existing record and change the end date, or should we create a new data entry? Again, it doesn't pertain to them being a returning client. It pertains to the receiving of the service. If that service is a continuation, then you would amend a record. If they're coming back for a new service, then you would create a new service in iCARE. Again, if that's not clear enough and there's specific scenarios that we can help you with, we're more than happy to talk about a very specific scenario, and we can discuss that through the help desk if you want. If for the same reason, if he is a 360 client, only enter one time during the fiscal year. I'm not sure what the 360s were referenced to.
It's probably 360-degree support. Yeah,
Okay.
Client has more barriers, so case management, complex case management.
Case management, perfect. That is actually a really great question, because through the case management program, we know that clients receive multiple needs assessment. So in a nutshell, and again, I think we have documentation on this, and I'm going by memory. So we talk this out, this exact scenario, because there's an expectation that a client will receive a needs assessment. They will go on their journey. They may come back, receive another needs assessment. There might be an alteration between what was identified in the first and second needs assessment. In this scenario, even, I guess as I've been using the word continuation of the same service. In this scenario, I would call it the exception to the rule, is that that second needs assessment, if it wasn't attributed to that very first meeting, you may want to create that second needs assessment. And the reason being is we need to be able to distinguish the difference in needs from that first assessment record to the needs identified in that second assessment record. So I think that is a perfect question. And at the top of my head, you would create two different needs assessment records in iCARE. It would not be a continuation. But again, I think that is something I need to verify with our policy team to make sure that is an appropriate analysis of how they want things done. So I think that is everything. Thanks again. And I guess I'll leave it at that. I think you guys have probably heard my voice enough, but I do appreciate all the questions, and I hope we've been able to address. We will be sharing this deck with you through AMSSA, and we will also update the previous deck we did as well.
Thank you. I'll just jump in here really quick, and then I'm sure Julie, maybe you're going to wrap up quickly. But thank you so much, Justin, and to Jeslyn for taking the time to join us. And I was really glad to see all of these questions being answered. And that, kind of tells me that there was really a need to this, and that maybe there's going to be some follow up, in a couple cases too, with questions either going to the help desk, maybe talking to your officers. That's all totally okay. The point today, I think, was to do this learning, and then there's going to be a little bit of follow-up in some cases, and that is fantastic. So thank you so much for sticking with us, everybody.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much to Justin, Jeslyn, and Jared for speaking with everyone and sharing this information. We hope that you all enjoyed the webinar. AMSSA will be emailing participants an online evaluation form. It'd be great if you could take out the time to take the time to fill it out as you rely on that feedback to plan future events and training. So enjoy the rest of your day.